Arthur, are you listening? You just need to sign the papers and we're finished. My wife, Annie, whom I've been married to for over 25 years, was speaking to me. I tried to pay attention, but her voice seemed to drift further away as her rant continued. It all began this afternoon when I came home from work. Annie sat at the table with a glass of wine and a determined expression. Unfortunately, she only had one glass, neglecting to consider if I might want one too, especially given the direction our conversation was taking. I sensed trouble brewing as I sat down. Without asking about my day, Annie plunged into the news that she was leaving me. She claimed to have found her soulmate, someone who made her happier than I ever did, rendering me no longer adequate. Despite her escalating volume, her words became increasingly distant to me. Our story followed a familiar pattern. We met in high school, stayed together, and welcomed our daughter Sally shortly after getting married. While she wasn't the primary reason we tied the knot, she was always part of the plan. Presently, we both held steady jobs, lived comfortably, and had managed to pay off our house, with some savings to boot. We frequently professed our love, took family vacations, and though our physical closeness had waned over time, we still found moments of closeness. I believed our love ran deep, and we were destined to grow old together until this afternoon. Annie's rant continued, her face reddening with each passing moment. "Arthur, look at me!" It became increasingly difficult to focus, but I turned towards her. "You need to sign these papers." She pointed adamantly at the documents before me. Her tone was demanding, yet I struggled to maintain concentration. It felt as though the room's brightness and color were fading, despite the kitchen lights being on. Internally, I was fraught with emotion, but externally, my body remained unresponsive. The longer I remained silent, the angrier Annie grew. The last thing I remember is her slap, though I couldn't feel the impact. I imagined it leaving a prominent red mark, but still I couldn't move, and the world seemed to darken around me.
It had been a long day. The drive home from university was delayed due to an accident slowing everyone down. When I arrived home, there was an eerie quietness in the house. The lights were on, Dad's car was in the driveway, but Mom's was nowhere to be seen. Upon entering the kitchen, I threw my bag and books on the ground. Dad sat at the table, motionless, staring into space. On the table lay an open bottle of Mom's wine and a mostly empty glass. In front of Dad were papers with numerous "Sign Here" tabs. Approaching Dad, I touched his shoulder from behind. "Hey, Dad." I anticipated a response, but he remained unresponsive. Walking around to face him, I was taken aback. His eyes appeared glazed, almost milky white, with traces of tears staining his cheeks. He wasn't blinking, and a trail of drool hung from his mouth, threatening to drip into his lap. Panicked, I called out, "Dad! Dad! Come back to me, Dad!" Tears welled in my eyes. With no response from Dad, I tried to calm myself. "Slow down, Sally. Dad needs help," I whispered to myself. Retrieving my phone, I dialed emergency. I explained that my father, Arthur Other, was unresponsive. After providing my details and address, they dispatched an ambulance, promising a 10-minute arrival time. I sat beside Dad, holding his hand, offering reassurance. This man had been my everything growing up. Despite his demanding job, he always made time for my school events, musicals, and ballet. He endured my early attempts at the violin, encouraging me every step of the way. On my 16th birthday, he surprised me with a Heidersheim violin, not the best, but it held sentimental value as it came from him. Now, 5 years later, I was studying music at university with a focus on strings and violin, thanks to his unwavering support. As I waited, questions raced through my mind. Why was Dad like this? What had happened? And where was Mom? Glancing at the paperwork on the table, the words "petition for divorce" caught my eye. Shocked, I began reading, my skin crawling at the revelation that Mom wanted to divorce Dad for reasons unknown to me. It appeared highly likely that Dad's condition stemmed from the documents, especially considering Mom's open wine bottle, indicating she had given Dad the papers and left. People often speculate on the rapid fluctuation of emotions. I suppose they've never experienced such a betrayal. For me, any compassion and desire to be in my mother's presence faded away. Shortly after, the ambulance arrived, and I directed them in getting Dad onto a gurney and off to the hospital. After locking up the house, I followed behind, making calls as I drove. I contacted my grandmother, Dad's mom, his sister Rhonda, his best friend, and then his manager at work, informing them of Dad's situation and his impending absence. I explained that I found him unresponsive and that he was en route to the hospital. Everyone requested updates on his condition, and his manager assured me of arranging emergency leave and informing their boss. I knew I was putting off the next call, consumed with anger, but I felt compelled to call Mom. The phone rang, and she answered after a couple of rings. "Hi, Sally, my darling, how was your day?" I was taken aback by her casual tone. Surely she couldn't be so naive as to think I wouldn't know what was happening. It had been almost an hour since I found Dad, and Mom was well aware of my routine. "Where are you, Mom?" "I'm out and about, sweetie," she trailed off, sensing my inquiry. "So, in other words, you've just shattered my father, your husband, and left him without a second thought?" "Oh, no, darling, I tried to explain to your father about Paul and the situation, but he wasn't responsive, so I thought it best to leave and let him process that we won't be living with him anymore." Her attempt to downplay the situation infuriated me. Given Dad's state, it seemed more likely that she had ripped his heart out and left it shattered before him. "It appears to me like you abandoned him when he needed help. Are you truly that heartless? Do you even understand what's happening now, or do you simply not care?" Anger began to seep into my voice. "Sweetie, don't get angry now. I understand this is a shock, but your father will be fine. I'm only asking for what is rightfully mine and some support while Paul and I wait to marry." Yep, my mother was firmly in La-La Land. "Angry? You haven't seen angry yet, Mother. And just so you know, I'm currently following Dad to the hospital. He's in an ambulance, and when I got home, he looked like he'd had a stroke." "Oh, Sally, my sweetie, I'm sorry to hear that, but—" "No excuses, Mother. Let me ask you, is this Paul you're running off with the same Paul from your work that you keep talking about?" She hesitated. "Of course, darling. Paul, the man from my mother's workplace she never stopped mentioning. So, let me get this straight. He's a dozen years younger than you, and you've been having an affair with him for how long?" Again, she hesitated. 6 months. "Right. So for the last 6 months, you've been involved with someone from your workplace behind Dad's back. You've been lying to Dad and me, hiding your affair. I had no idea you were capable of such deceit, and clearly neither did Dad, judging by the state you left him in. How did you expect either of us to react?" "Well, I suppose not positively at first, but once we're living with Paul, you'll see we're meant to be together." "We?" She had just referred to we for the second time. Did she expect me to abandon Dad to move in with her and her boyfriend? I could feel my anger boiling over. I knew I would say something regrettable if I didn't stop. I'm going to hang up now before I say something I might regret. But let me be crystal clear. I will not be leaving Dad, and there's no way I'm going anywhere near Paul, let alone moving into the place you and he are cavorting in. "Sally Other," my mother responded sharply. "I am your mother, and I will not be spoken to like that, regardless of how upset you are." "Then I guess we're done talking." I hung up before she could say anything else. If she thought I would condone what she was doing, she had another thing coming. She tried calling me back multiple times, then started calling Dad's phone, which was silly because if he could, I doubted he would pick up a call from her. Since I had Dad's phone with me, I ignored any calls from her. By the time I reached the hospital, the ambulance crew had admitted Dad, and he was in a ward under observation. Aunt Rhonda had arrived and informed me that she had also received several calls from my mother, but wasn't sure what was happening other than her brother being in the hospital. When I explained the situation, Aunt Rhonda turned a deep shade of scarlet, almost as if steam were coming out of her ears. "Sally, do you have the documents that woman left for my brother?" "Sure, Aunt Rhonda. Here you go." Aside from being my aunt, Rhonda was also our family attorney. For the next hour, we sat beside Dad as Rhonda read through the documents, occasionally muttering under her breath. Doctors and nurses came in and out of the room periodically, checking on Dad. "Well, the bad news is that your mother is going to get her divorce from your father. The schedule outlined here shows that this process has been in motion for over 2 months and had to be served this week, or it would have incurred significantly higher fees from her legal team." I shrugged. I had heard enough justification from my mother. I was determined to ensure that she and Dad separated for what she had done. It was strange. I was never particularly close to my father, always looking up to my mom, but her actions seemed plain foolish. This whole mess seemed to be orchestrated by Paul, her so-called soulmate. Regardless, Mom and Dad weren't going to weather this storm, especially if Dad's current condition was any indication. The good news is that she hired a shyster of a lawyer to represent her. She's going to have to shell out a hefty sum just for the divorce, and even more if it goes to court. Rhonda grinned. Meanwhile, my dear brother has the best lawyer in town, and he's getting the family discount. We shared a smile for the first time that evening. Additionally, some of the claims here, like wanting 50% equity in the house and 60% of the financial assets, along with spousal and child maintenance, are likely quite exaggerated. I assume from your reaction that you're not planning to live with your mother. I shook my head in confirmation. Good. Okay. I have some initial thoughts. However, we need to see what happens with your dad over the next 24 hours. Your mother could already be in hot water for abandonment and mental cruelty. The next few days flew by, with doctors constantly checking on Dad. Physically, he was fine and healthy, but he remained unresponsive. I managed to continue my university studies in the hospital chair by his bed, laptop and textbook in hand. Occasionally, a family member would relieve me, allowing me to go home, catch a few hours of sleep, and return. I'll admit, I shed a few tears at home, alone in the house. One of the most surprising moments during Dad's hospital stay was when Tina Williams, the owner of the company where Dad worked, paid him a visit. While I knew Dad's manager, Tom, I had never met Tina herself. Tina was a striking woman, curvaceous without being overweight, with tan skin, dark raven hair, and mesmerizing blue eyes that could make any person, male or female, swoon. As it turned out, Dad had been part of a group at his workplace that had supported Tina a few years back during her messy divorce. Her unfaithful ex-husband had attempted to claim a significant portion of their savings and nearly succeeded in taking half of her business. Dad had introduced her to Aunt Rhonda, who had successfully protected Tina's assets, ensuring she didn't lose any business shares and securing child support for her then 6-year-old daughter. Tina visited Dad several times, expressing shock when I briefed her on the general summary of why he was hospitalized. She brought cards from everyone at Dad's workplace and spent time holding his hand, sharing stories from the office. It turned out Dad had a knack for humor in the workplace, and his absence was deeply felt by his colleagues. I should mention that Dad is an accountant by profession, working for one of the financial clearinghouses that assist banks in processing payments to financial institutions. While the work may be tedious, Dad apparently brightened up the workday for everyone with his humor and presence. About 2 weeks later, I returned from a shower and a nap at home to find Rhonda and Tina in the midst of a conversation. Although it seemed a bit heated, their frustration was aimed at my mother rather than each other. It turned out that my mother had sent a demand letter to Tina, requesting access to all of Dad's bonuses from the past few years. It didn't matter that the bonuses had already been paid out. The letter demanded that she receive 50% of them within 30 days into a designated bank account, or she would pursue legal action against Tina. Besides the absurdity of her claim for money already dispersed, it seems like she and her new partner are in dire financial straits since I've frozen all the joint assets while Arthur is incapacitated, Rhonda remarked, sporting an exploitative grin. I chuckled, making my presence known. Yes. This morning I received my first communication from Mom in 2 weeks. A text message asking if I could lend her a few $1,000s. I haven't responded because I'm still pretty upset with her. I mean, she hasn't even asked about Dad since I told her what she did to him. Over the past couple of weeks, Tina had become fiercely protective of my dad. Whenever my mother was brought up, Tina's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping in pitch, indicating her deep disdain for Annie Uther. It was as if I could see sparks flickering around her smoldering eyes. I just hoped she never had to be in the same room with my mother, otherwise I feared she might incinerate her on the spot. Despite my current feelings toward my mother, she was still my mother. She has destroyed the most wonderful man. Sally, if it weren't for your father, I wouldn't have my Clarice or my business. So many people in the office helped me during one of the lowest points in my life, but your father took the time to listen to me. He never judged my ex-husband or me. He just let me talk. No one has ever done that without offering an opinion. He introduced me to your aunt here, ensuring I was taken care of. If he were single, I would have pursued him with everything I had after my divorce. I shrugged and let a smile grace my face. He won't be married much longer. Their faces registered realization, and Rhonda giggled while Tina smiled. Thanks, Sally. I needed that. I still can't believe what your mother has done to him or that she discarded such an amazing man. I need to head back to the office, but before I do... Tina walked over to my dad, and as Rhonda and I watched, she bent down and gave him a tender but sincere kiss on the lips. She looked up at us and smiled. However, her smile quickly turned into shock when my dad emitted a groan.
As I gradually woke up, I sensed soft lips on mine, just the right amount of pressure, conveying a gentle and tender affection I hadn't felt in a long time. The hospital room's beeping and my groans reminded me of my surroundings. Anticipating Annie's presence as I opened my eyes after that affectionate kiss, I was surprised to find Tina standing there with a smile on her face. "Tina?" Approaching from the other side of the bed, Sally and Rhonda joined us. "It's okay, Daddy. You're going to be okay, you hear?" As my memories caught up with me, I realized Annie was leaving me or had already left. What happened? Over the next few minutes, the three of them filled me in on how Sally had found me unresponsive, called an ambulance, and discovered the divorce papers, revealing Annie's months-long infidelity. I learned how Annie had threatened Tina once Rhonda froze our finances until they could determine my condition. "How long?" 2 weeks, Arthur," Rhonda replied. I turned to Tina. You kissed me?" Tina blushed. "Yeah, sorry, I was about to head back to the office and was saying goodbye." I smiled. "No, it's okay. I guess I'm on the market, so I think it's okay." Over the next few hours, various doctors came through, conducting physical checkups, blood tests, and more. Tina canceled her visit to the office and stayed, along with Rhonda and Sally. Among the doctors was a psychologist. As he probed into my experiences, I recounted finding Annie alone, drinking, and her announcement of leaving me. I described how the world seemed to lose color, and sensory input became disjointed, making it difficult to move despite growing upset. My last memory was of Annie slapping and yelling at me, her words incomprehensible. The girls collectively gasped at the revelation of Annie's aggression, while I was unable to respond. "Dad, what time do you think it was when you became unresponsive?" "I'd say it was around 5:30, baby." "Why?" "Because it was past 7:30 when I got home and found you, and there was no red mark on your cheek. So I assume Mom must have left you there alone for quite some time." The psychologist interjected. "It's not uncommon for someone in your situation to experience misuse while unresponsive. In your case, I'd say you went into shock upon hearing your wife's declaration of leaving you. Although this is a much more extreme case than usual, it does make sense." Rhonda added, "When Arthur was young, there was a bully a few years older than him. He teased Arthur quite a bit, and one day a neighborhood parent found Arthur lying on the ground in a local park. Our parents put him to bed, and he woke up the next morning. It wasn't overthought, as he woke up regularly the next day, but it did happen. I remember Billy pushing me around and teasing me in the park. After a while, I didn't know what happened, but when I woke up, Mom and Dad told me I had passed out and someone brought me home. When I told them about Billy, they spoke to his parents. The next day, Billy came up to me at school and apologized. I chuckled at the memory. I don't think he was sincere, but he never bothered me again after that day. "I believe we may have a precedent here," the psychologist mentioned. "In many ways, the mind remains poorly understood. However, if something similar has occurred before, it's plausible it could happen again." I frowned. He reassured. "I wouldn't worry too much. With the love and attention of these three lovely ladies, even if something were to happen again, I believe you will be well taken care of." We conversed for a few more minutes before he excused himself. I also found myself fatigued, which might seem odd for someone who had just slept for the past 2 weeks. But I was. So I sent all three girls home to rest, and informed them they could visit me tomorrow to ensure I was all right. Over the next 2 days, I eased back into life. Tina brought me a work laptop and a few simple tasks to complete with instructions, only if I felt bored. Rhonda visited primarily to review her revised divorce documents and to have me sign some papers so she could proceed with ending my marriage to Annie. Rhonda also brought along a young detective, Karen Hill. Detective Hill conducted an hour-long interview with me regarding my experience that night with Annie. She thanked me and informed Rhonda and me that her report would be ready in a few days. I wasn't certain if we were planning to file a complaint against Annie. Eventually, however, Rhonda instructed me to leave everything to her, kissed me on the forehead, and departed. On the second day afternoon, after waking up from what Sally dubbed my checkout, I was discharged to return home. Sally accompanied me, and I was surprised to find Tina waiting at the door. She assisted Sally in guiding me to her large suburban SUV. Tina stayed for dinner that night. We opted for takeout, and she pitched in to clean up before staying to watch TV with us for a couple of hours. When she left, Sally hugged her and made sure I walked her to her car. "Tina, thank you so much for everything you've done these past few weeks. I don't know how I can repay you." "Well, in a few weeks, when you're feeling back on your game, you can take me out for dinner and dancing." I blushed. Here I was, just an afternoon out of the hospital, and the woman whose kiss had awakened me was asking me out. But she was attractive, and according to Annie, I was to be a single man again. "Okay, next Friday night after work. That gives me almost 2 weeks to get myself back to normal." She nodded and gave me a warm hug. It lingered a little longer, and I sensed a deeper meaning. As she got into her car, I found it amusing that for a moment I wondered about the name of the woman I had been married to for almost 25 years. For the next few days, Sally, Rhonda, and Tina hovered around me, ensuring I was all right. It was comforting to be cared for in such a way. However, the news Rhonda brought me that Friday afternoon caught all of us a little off guard. "This afternoon, Annie got arrested," she announced. "What happened?" I inquired. "Well, after your statement to the police at the hospital, they issued an arrest warrant for Annie on grounds of mental cruelty to a person with a disability. This is because you were mentally disabled and unable to defend yourself at the time. Also, she left you unattended for an unspecified period, which adds to her troubles," she explained. "What does this mean for the divorce?" Tina, who had joined us again for dinner, asked. That evening, she had her 8-year-old daughter Clarice with her, who was watching a Disney movie in the lounge room while we conversed. With Monday marking my return to work, Tina would see me then. However, I was starting to grasp that she was seeking more than just an efficient number cruncher in the office. I found myself not objecting to the idea of Tina and picturing her, contemplating what lay beneath those nicely fitting clothes she wore whenever she visited. Rhonda grinned. "It's likely going to tilt a few things in Arthur's favor. I'm advocating for a 50-50 split of the bank accounts in the house. I know we could aim for more given the circumstances, but I reckon Arthur would want to be fair." I nodded. "Annie won't be able to touch any of the bonus money she tried to extract from you, Tina. I filed a case against her for extortion alongside the mental cruelty charge. It won't do much except prevent her from accessing what isn't rightfully hers. She'll probably be out in a couple of days, none the worse for wear, and likely back with her wretched soulmate. What I aim to do is expedite the divorce using Arthur's hospitalization and recovery as a pretext. Then, depending on her reaction, I have plans in motion. I'll ensure Arthur doesn't lose anything he shouldn't," she said, smiling. "So, how long will the divorce take, Aunt Rhonda?" Sally inquired. "Assuming everything goes smoothly, it should take around 3 months. After that, if Annie decides to contest anything, I'll bring in reinforcements, which will prolong the process but inflict more damage on her," Rhonda explained. That evening, as I escorted Tina to her car, Sally assisted Clarice into the back seat of the large Suburban. Tina embraced me once again and surprised me with a quick kiss, reminiscent of the other day. "Arthur, I know you're married, and you're a man of honor, so I won't rush things. But I want to lay claim to you now and let you know that I desire you. I've wanted you for a long time, of course, but I'd never pursue a married man or disrespect someone's marital vows. I've experienced that myself, and I wouldn't want to inflict that on someone else, even if their marriage is in trouble," Tina expressed sincerely. For a moment, I gazed into her deep blue eyes, brushed a strand of her dark hair from her face, and then leaned in to kiss her. Instead of a tender kiss, it became one filled with passion, lasting perhaps 30 seconds. I sensed the mutual connection between us. When I pulled back, Tina's eyes were closed, and she ran her tongue over her lips, savoring our kiss. I grinned. "Consider that my acknowledgement of your claim." We glanced at the girls, both of them giggling at our kiss. Clarice was clapping, and Sally sported a huge grin. As Tina and Clarice drove off, Sally hugged me and we waved goodbye. The following months were quite a ride. On one hand, Annie wanted a speedy divorce, but on the other, she wasn't content with the settlement. It seemed Paul was calling the shots, convincing her she deserved the lion's share of the assets. He was feeding her lies, and deep down, she must have realized it after so many years of marriage. As her settlement demands grew more absurd, Rhonda had a single conversation with Annie's lawyer, and whatever was said put an end to all objections overnight. Tina and I went on dates every Friday night while Sally began babysitting Clarice, picking her up from school and looking after her, giving Tina and me time for dinner, coffee, and entertainment. Though we never went beyond holding hands and kissing, I had a feeling the night my divorce finalized would be unforgettable. Back at work now, things were going smoothly. While we were a successful financial organization, we weren't in the big leagues. We all did our jobs, were well compensated, and enjoyed each other's company. I think the staff caught on to Tina and me becoming an item at some point. Although everyone was happy for us, I had to dial back my usual antics. My direct manager, who reported to Tina, made sure to remind me of appropriate workplace behavior, considering I was essentially dating his boss. About 3.5 months later, we received a notification that the divorce would be finalized 1 week from the upcoming Thursday. There were no court proceedings. However, Annie had requested a meeting to discuss matters before the final decree. I agreed to meet the day before, and we arranged for her to visit the house to speak with both Sally and me. I had taken the afternoon off from work and prepared lamb chops and gnocchi in a burnt butter sauce for the three of us. It was a favorite meal for all of us, and I hoped it would help ease any potential awkwardness during our conversation that evening. Sally arrived home around 5:30, went to shower and change, and just before 6, the doorbell rang, signaling Annie's arrival at the front door. I haven't described Annie's appearance in some time, but perhaps I should now, with a before and after perspective. Before everything unfolded a few months ago, Annie was an attractive mid-40s housewife. She had cropped, shoulder-length brown hair, a curvy figure typical of a mother, and although carrying a few extra pounds, she was still quite attractive. With a well-proportioned 34C bust and an appealing rear, she was an attractive wife. Unfortunately, the woman standing before me now was almost unrecognizable. Annie had gained a significant amount of weight, developed jowls under her chin and puffy cheeks. Her stomach, which had previously had a slight mom belly, now sagged over her pants, and her once curvy posterior had expanded. Furthermore, she was dressed in loose-fitting clothes that concealed even more. Now, I have nothing against people of larger size, but that wasn't the Annie I knew. I think my surprise at her physical transformation was evident on my face, although Annie made no comment about it, merely grimacing in response. Hello, Annie. Please come in," I greeted as we entered the kitchen. I offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted, and we engaged in small talk for a few minutes. She inquired about work and my well-being, while I skipped the inquiry about her health. "It's what Paul wants. He didn't like how thin I was, so we've been working on bulking me up," she addressed the unspoken question. I frowned. For over 25 years, I had cherished this woman. Despite her actions, a lingering concern for her health remained, albeit greatly diminished. "You don't approve, do you?" She looked at me. "No, Annie, I don't. When we were together, you were a healthy size. But I'll be honest, I'm taken aback by your appearance. You don't seem well, and if I weren't so hurt by what you did, I'd be more concerned about your health and try to help," I expressed. "But you don't care, do you?" Her expression fell. "You and Sally, you're happy and healthy without me here." "Well, there's a part of me that cares, but when you walked out of here and practically left me for dead," I trailed off, shrugging while she sighed. "I deserve that. I did a terrible thing, didn't I?" "No, Mother," Sally interjected, appearing fresh from the shower. "You did a freaking horrible thing. You single-handedly tore apart a happy family, then walked out without a care in the world. And I, for one, can't understand why Dad agreed to let you come here tonight." "Sally, calm down," I intervened. "Your mother knows the situation we're in and how unhappy we all are. She requested this meeting tonight, so I thought the least we could do is be mature and hear her out." Sally wasn't pleased. As far as I could tell, like me, she hadn't spoken to her mother since that momentous day. The way my daughter was glaring at her mother, this situation wouldn't end well for anyone. It was time to steer the conversation elsewhere. Attempting a cheerful tone, I suggested, "Tough discussions aren't ideal right before dinner, so let's eat first." I served dinner, and though no one spoke, there were numerous glances exchanged across the table. Sally maintained a steady glare at her mother throughout the meal. After dinner, I cleared the table and Annie requested to speak to Sally alone. "No way! You can say whatever you want to me with both of us present," Sally retorted firmly. I felt torn, but it was evident Sally was resolute about not being left alone with her mother. Annie seemed to sense that too. The look in her eyes mirrored what her mother had done to me on that fateful night. She acquiesced. Annie took a deep breath, hesitant to discuss matters in front of me, but she addressed Sally. "Well, Sally, I wanted to ask for your forgiveness for what happened that night. I didn't handle things properly, and despite everything, I don't want to estrange my daughter forever." Glancing at me, Annie added, "There's more, but I'd prefer to discuss it in private without your father present." "Sorry, Mom, but if you can't say it to both of us, then I don't want to hear it," Sally declared. Before Annie could respond, Sally stood up and left the room, slamming her bedroom door shut moments later. "I hope that would go better," Annie murmured softly, more to herself than to me. "I think considering the circumstances, it went rather smoothly," I replied, letting her know I understood. "Really?" Annie sounded surprised. "Yes, really," I sighed, continuing. "Annie, you need to realize that at this moment, nobody in this house holds much affection for you." She started to reply, but I raised my hand, signaling her to let me finish and lay everything out. "First, you engage in a long-term carnal affair with someone, then conceal it from both Sally and me. Next, you serve me with divorce papers out of the blue, and when I enter what Sally refers to as checkout mode, you proceed to yell, scream, and then slap me." Annie appeared stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. "Yes, I remember that, and I recall most of that time until shortly after you first slapped me. But let's continue. At some point, you abandon me when I am unresponsive, leaving me there until Sally arrives home and discovers me in the same state," I recounted. Annie's expression turned to panic. "When Sally calls you, you show no concern for me despite your daughter being visibly distressed about her father. You never once inquire about my well-being until tonight, make unreasonable demands of my workplace, and upon entering here, it's still all about you. You ask Sally for forgiveness, yet you have not apologized to her at any point." I paused briefly, hoping my words would resonate. "Yes, Annie, with all of that considered, I think things went quite well." Annie's gaze shifted to the floor, tears welling in her eyes. They hadn't yet fallen, but they lingered threateningly. I couldn't discern whether they were for Sally, myself, or simply a reflection of her own emotions. Continuing, I stated, "Now our divorce will be finalized tomorrow, and unless you have anything further to add, I believe we have fulfilled your request for a final meeting." I walked to the door and opened it. Annie glanced at me before exiting. Once outside, she turned to look at me. "Arthur, we did have some good years, didn't we?" "Yes, Annie, most of our time together was incredible. You were an exceptional lover, a devoted wife, and a loving mother. I'm not sure what this Paul character has done to you, but I don't see the woman I fell in love with in the person standing before me. All I see is someone who seems lost, manipulated into becoming overweight, self-centered, and caring more about what others can provide for you than the people themselves." Once again, she lowered her gaze to her feet. "You truly mean that, don't you, Arthur?" "Yes, I do," I affirmed. She turned to leave but hesitated, looking utterly broken this time. "Arthur, about the house. Paul told me I needed to ask." So that was the purpose of her visit. It wasn't about reconnecting with her family. It was solely about money. I chuckled, leaving Annie puzzled by my reaction. "Go tell your soulmate that you'll have your share of the savings and the equity from this house transferred to the bank account your lawyer provided to Rhonda by this time tomorrow. And Annie," she glanced at me, "protect that money from Paul or you won't have it for long. Update." The next morning marked the final decree, and Annie and I were officially no longer husband and wife. There was a small twinge of sadness within me, but it was fleeting. Mostly I felt content. The past few months had been challenging for everyone. Now, at 48 years old, I felt liberated, knowing I still had much life left to live. Rhonda phoned to inform me that pizza was on her tonight at my place. During lunch at the office, Sally dropped by. We reminisced about happier times with her mother when we were a complete family. Despite Sally's dislike for her mother, I could sense she missed the woman she once was. Truthfully, I did too. We shared many good years together. As Sally left, there seemed to be a silent exchange between her and Tina. Not long after, I was summoned to Tina's office. She closed the door and then kissed me passionately, as if the sun might never rise again. I must admit, I responded in kind. "Can I claim you as mine now, Arthur?" Tina asked. I felt a sore spot on my neck, likely from a bruise forming where she had just kissed me moments before. I think you may have already done that. That evening's dinner was delightful, with Sally, Rhonda, Tina, and Clarice all joining in to celebrate my newfound freedom from Annie. Later that Friday night, after the girls were in bed, Tina and I consummated our relationship. I must have done something right because throughout the weekend, Tina seemed a bit sore whenever she sat down, but her eyes burned with a fiery passion that I knew was reserved for me alone. 6 months later, we tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony by a local lake, with many of our colleagues in attendance. Though we initially planned to marry later, we decided to move the date up to coincide with the arrival of Sally and Clarice's new little brother. Update. 5 years had passed, and Sally, her boyfriend Tina, and I were enjoying dinner at a local restaurant when 5-year-old Keegan posed a question. "Daddy, who is that lady who keeps staring at us?" Turning to look, we spotted Annie sitting across the room. She had noticeably lost weight and appeared discontent. Since the divorce, we hadn't seen or heard from her, and she hadn't attempted to contact Sally. Excusing myself from the table, I approached her. "Hi, Annie." "Hi, Arthur. How are you?" I inquired. She glanced down at her chicken salad, replying, "You were right, Arthur. You were right about him. Paul convinced me I was his soulmate, and you meant nothing to him. But when I didn't receive the money up front, he persuaded me to gain weight because he loved me and preferred overweight women. After receiving the divorce settlement, you advised me not to give it to him. But I didn't listen. He squandered it in 6 months and then abandoned me." Though I was still upset with her, her story lacked the happy ending mine had. "Since then, I've spent every moment trying to rebuild the confidence he shattered and reclaim some semblance of my former self," she confessed, holding back tears as she looked at me. After all these years, that look resembled the Annie I once knew. "Arthur, I am so sorry. I treated you horribly. I did it because I believed Paul knew things you didn't. I abandoned the man who truly loved me, leaving you unresponsive and—" She paused, gripping the table's edge. "You could have died because of my actions. I know you can never forgive me, but I want to apologize." Tears streamed openly down her face. Surprisingly, Sally had joined us, standing beside me, also witnessing her mother's apology. She gave me a weary smile, grabbed my hand, and extended her hand to her mother. Seeing Sally and then witnessing her extending her hand, Annie panicked, attempting to leave, but Sally blocked her path. "Mom, stop! You don't need to leave!" Sally asserted. Sliding into the booth next to Annie, Sally and I joined her. I glanced at Tina, who nodded in agreement. For the next hour, mother and daughter conversed. There were many tears shed, but for once, they were healing, not hurtful. Once they caught up, Sally and I reintroduced Annie to everyone else. Annie seemed a bit unsettled when introduced to Keegan as Auntie Annie. Following that day, we gradually welcomed Annie back into our lives. Sally and her mother reconnected slowly, meeting for coffee every week or two. Trust developed gradually between them, but eventually solidified. When Sally got married, Annie had the opportunity to play the role of mother of the bride. Tina occasionally invited Annie over for dinner at our house. Initially, I suspected it was to spite Annie for what she had lost, and Tina had gained by marrying me. However, while they never became close friends, Tina and Annie developed an odd sort of friendship that I never quite understood. Rhonda never forgave Annie for the injury she inflicted on me, although she remained polite when they encountered each other. With Tina's approval, Annie and I engaged in some post-marriage counseling. We addressed many of the issues from our past, spanning over 5 years ago. The counselor speculated that Annie might have been experiencing hormonal imbalances, but Annie vehemently rejected this notion. No, I threw away the most precious things in my life that day. I had a loving husband and a daughter who wanted to be with me. No hormonal imbalance can justify how I destroyed everything good in my life for someone who was nothing but trouble in bed and had an inadequate appendage, she remarked with a sweet smile directed at me. "Arthur and Sally deserve better from me," she admitted tearfully, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "It took me 5 years to reconnect with them. I thank God every day that Arthur has allowed me back into his life. And Tina, too," she blushed, acknowledging Tina's warmth towards her despite everything. "She had every reason to hate me, yet she has always treated me kindly. I got lucky losing everything I discarded, and I will bear that burden for a long time." Annie gained more from those counseling sessions than I did. It was reassuring to confirm that neither Sally nor I were responsible for Annie's decision to leave us. And she was right. Tina had lifted us up and forged a stronger family bond.
They say people pay for their mistakes eventually, and Paul did. He moved to another state and once again attempted to manipulate a married woman for her money. This time, however, the woman's husband caught Paul in the act and took matters into his own hands, rendering Paul incapable. The husband received a 10-year sentence, but if Rhonda's rumors were accurate, he might be released sooner. Tina and I are still deeply in love. I never imagined I could love anyone as much or as deeply as I did Annie, but Tina proved me wrong. She not only gave me her love, but also her soul wholeheartedly. We continue to work together in her company, and I'm still in the same job. While we have our ups and downs, we always prioritize communication when it matters. Her physique remains remarkable, and we still make love frequently. We've even indulged in lovemaking moments in exotic locations while on vacation. Often, just one glance is enough to lead us locking the bedroom door and passionately indulging in each other.
Once, after we had finished making love, showered and dressed, we entered the kitchen to find Sally and Annie engaged in conversation. We had recently learned that Sally was expecting, sparking excitement as the girls discussed the arrival of my first grandchild.
My goodness, Sally, you'd think these two were teenagers with the way they behave. Tina, you'll have to let me in on your secret to keeping Arthur so lively.
Maybe I can get some tips to keep Fred on his toes, Sally teased. Amidst laughter, I blushed. Annie had been casually dating lately, but nothing serious until Fred entered the picture. Mom, let them be. We all know that Dad has been on a mission since... You know, Sally teased mischievously, her eyes twinkling. Annie hesitated while Sally laughed and Tina blushed. I simply leaned back, smirked at my girls, and felt myself stirred again by Tina's presence. Eventually, I excused myself, making my way back to the bedroom, with Tina following shortly after, locking the door behind her.
My wife came home that evening with a grin plastered across her face. Before I could ask, she announced that she'd finally been transferred to a new department. According to her, this was the opportunity she had been waiting for: better pay, a more dynamic environment, and most importantly, a team that wasn't, in her words, dull as a butter knife. She seemed genuinely excited about it, so I nodded and congratulated her. It wasn't every day she came home this cheerful, so I figured it must be a big deal. She went on about how this new group of colleagues had already planned something to kick things off. Apparently, they had decided to rent a cabin out in the woods for a weekend to get to know each other better. A bit excessive, if you asked me, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Sounds like a lot of effort for a work outing, I commented casually. She waved it off, explaining that these new colleagues of hers were all about creating a bonding experience. Whatever that meant. Out of curiosity, I asked when this grand event was supposed to take place. She told me they hadn't nailed down all the details yet. We decided to meet up next Friday after work to discuss everything, she said. And we'll be hosting the meeting here at our place. That caught my attention. I wasn't against having people over, but I assumed they'd have it all figured out by now. I thought you said they were organized, I remarked. She laughed and replied, not everything happens overnight. Besides, this is just the first step. It wasn't long before she hit me with a special request. My wife's tone shifted slightly, signaling that she was gearing up for something she thought I might resist. I raised an eyebrow and waited. You know how you can become a bit traditional, she started. I didn't respond, letting her dig herself deeper. Well, my new colleagues are progressive. They're young, enthusiastic, and they think they're going to change the world. You know how it is. I didn't, but I let her continue. Her request was straightforward enough: please, don't make any of your usual jokes. In fact, it'd be better if you just nodded and smiled, no matter what they say. Can you do that for me? I stared at her for a moment, wondering what exactly she thought I was going to do. And what do I get out of this? I asked, half joking. Without missing a beat, she replied, how about I don't hit you over the head with a frying pan? She laughed, clearly amused with herself. I couldn't help but smirk. She knew how to keep things light when she wanted to. Fine, I said. But if they cross any lines, don't expect me to sit there quietly." She nodded, satisfied with my agreement. The rest of the evening was spent discussing logistics. She listed off the snacks she'd need, what furniture might need rearranging, and how we'd set up the living room for the group. I listened, chiming in here and there, but mostly letting her take the reins. She seemed to have it all under control, and I wasn't about to interfere with her enthusiasm. By the end of the conversation, it was clear we were on the same page. Friday evening would be the start of this new chapter for her, and our home would be ground zero for their planning. "All right," I said, wrapping up the discussion. "We'll be ready for them." By Friday evening, the house was spotless. I'd gone through every room, dusted the shelves, vacuumed the carpets, and even wiped down the windows. For good measure, I set up a couple of those plug-in air fresheners to keep things smelling decent. I wasn't particularly thrilled about hosting a group of strangers, but my wife wanted everything to be perfect, so I figured I might as well put in the effort. Once the work was done, I sat down with a beer, thinking about her earlier comment about her colleagues. It wasn't like her to warn me about how to behave around people, especially not with such a specific tone. It made me wonder if something had already happened with them. My questions were answered soon enough. When her colleagues arrived, they didn't bother with introductions or even basic manners. They burst into the living room like they owned the place, chatting loudly and ignoring us completely. I've hosted plenty of gatherings over the years, but this was a first. I sat there, taking it all in, while my wife threw me a glance and mouthed, "Just let it go." One guy, clearly the loudest of the bunch, didn't waste any time making an impression. He looked around the room and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Wow, I didn't know people hired help for houses this small." My dad hires staff for our summer home, but this, he let the sentence hang, smirking as if he'd just said something clever. For a moment, the room fell silent. I wasn't about to let that slide. I leaned forward and locked eyes with him. "If you don't apologize right now, you'll be out of this house so fast your dad will need a mop to pick you up off the street." My tone left no room for interpretation. The others looked at him, clearly waiting to see how he'd respond. To his credit, he muttered an apology, though it was clear he wasn't used to being called out. I leaned back, satisfied. The tension eased, and the group eventually settled into a more reasonable rhythm. As the evening progressed, the awkward start faded into the background. They helped themselves to drinks and snacks, filling the house with chatter. One of the women, who seemed to be the unofficial leader of the group, started talking about their plans for the cabin trip. She explained that it was meant to be a sort of informal team-building event to welcome new employees. Spouses, partners, and even friends were welcome to join. The idea was to make it a fun and relaxed weekend. "We've already found the perfect spot," she said, her enthusiasm contagious. "It's this small house in the middle of the woods. There's a barbecue area, plenty of space to hang out, and we'll all stay overnight. It'll be great." The others chimed in, clearly on board with the idea. I had to admit, it sounded better than I expected. What caught my attention was when she mentioned an extra activity planned for the end of the night. "We're keeping it a surprise," she said with a mischievous grin. "But trust me, it'll be worth it. It's completely optional, so no pressure to join in if it's not your thing." That set off a few chuckles among the group, but I wasn't laughing. Surprises weren't my thing, especially not when they involved strangers. "Can we just cut to the chase and tell me what it is?" I asked, half joking but curious enough to want an answer. She shook her head. "Nope," she said. "You'll have to wait and see. It'll ruin the fun if I tell you now." My wife looked at me, as if silently urging me not to push further. "All right then," I said finally, leaning back in my seat. Whatever this surprise was, I'd deal with it when the time came. For now, I figured I'd let them enjoy their moment and keep my thoughts to myself. My wife seemed pleased that I wasn't making a fuss, and I took that as a small win for the evening. After the last of her colleagues left, I closed the door and turned around to find my wife glaring at me, her arms crossed. "You couldn't keep quiet, could you?" she said, her voice sharp. I'd seen her annoyed before, but this was something else entirely. Do you have any idea who that guy is? That's the son of some bigwig with connections to my boss. Do you know what kind of position you've put me in? She paced back and forth, clearly trying to control her frustration. I leaned against the door, letting her get it out of her system before responding. Listen, I said evenly. I don't care whose son he is. If he comes into my house and acts like a disrespectful idiot, I'm not going to sit there and take it. I'm your husband, not some roommate who'll let things slide just to keep the peace. If he can't behave, he's not welcome here. My tone was firm, and I meant every word. She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes narrowing. Do you even understand how this works? He's got connections that could make or break careers at my office. You're not helping me by creating enemies. You're making it harder for me to get ahead. Her words were heated, but I wasn't about to back down. And what about respect for our home? I shot back. Am I supposed to let some entitled kid walk all over us just because he knows a few people? That's not how I operate. If he can't handle being called out for his behavior, that's his problem, not mine. I'm not apologizing for standing up for what's right. We stared at each other for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Finally, she sighed and threw up her hands. Fine, she said, her tone softening slightly. Let's just move on. We've got the big day to prepare for, and I need you to be on your best behavior. Can you do that for me? I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced this conversation was over. The following days were busy, and my wife seemed more preoccupied than usual. She spent a lot of time on her phone, typing away with an intensity one hadn't seen before. It was hard not to notice, and eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Who are you texting so much? I asked casually one evening. She glanced up, hesitating for a moment before answering. It's that guy from the party, she said. The one you had the issue with. Apparently, he's the one financing the upcoming corporate event with his dad's money. One of my colleagues is sick, so she asked me to coordinate a few things with him. That's all. Her explanation seemed straightforward enough, but something about it didn't sit right with me. All right, I said, my tone measured. But let me be clear. If I catch him trying to cross any lines with you, I'll handle it my way. And I don't care whose son he is or how much money he's throwing around. I made sure she understood I wasn't joking. She rolled her eyes but nodded. Relax, she said with a half smile. I've got no interest in him, and I'd never let him or anyone else try anything. You don't need to worry about that. Her response was reassuring, but I still made a mental note to keep an eye on things. Better safe than sorry. Getting ready for the corporate event tested my patience more than I'd expected. I'd been ready for an hour, Dior Sauvage, good jeans, a sharp shirt. That's all a man needs. My wife, on the other hand, spent what felt like an eternity deciding what to wear. Dresses, shoes, accessories, it was a parade of options. Meanwhile, I sat on the couch, glancing at the clock every few minutes, resisting the urge to rush her. When she finally emerged, she looked stunning, as she always did. But still, an hour was an hour. The drive to the event was uneventful until we hit the highway. That's when we saw him, the same rich kid from the party. My wife pointed out his car, an expensive, flashy thing that screamed, "Look at me." At the next red light, he rolled down his window and gave us a nod before speeding off. His driving was reckless, weaving between cars like he owned the road. He's going to kill someone one day, I muttered. My wife shrugged, dismissing my comment. That's just how he is, she said, as if that made it acceptable. When we arrived, people were already setting up. The cabin was nestled in the woods, with a barbecue area and enough space for everyone to spread out. I'll admit, it was a nice spot. The atmosphere was relaxed, and for the most part, people seemed friendly. I'd been expecting the worst, but some of her colleagues turned out to be decent. It wasn't long before the grills were fired up, and the smell of cooking meat filled the air. I took over one of the grills, figuring it was better than standing around making small talk. Cooking was something I could handle. By the time I was done, everyone was raving about the steak and burgers I prepared. "Looks like you found your calling," one of the guys joked. I smirked but didn't respond. Compliments were nice, but I wasn't here to impress anyone. As the evening went on, I couldn't help but notice the rich kid hovering nearby. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it became obvious he was sticking close to our group. He'd engage in short conversations with others, but his eyes kept darting toward us. It was strange. Earlier, he'd been chatting and laughing with everyone, but now he seemed distracted. I decided to confront him, but not in an aggressive way. "I'm heading out for a smoke," I said to no one in particular. Then I turned to him. "Care to join?" He hesitated, but eventually nodded. We walked a bit away from the group, and I lit a cigarette. "You've been watching us all evening," I said, cutting to the chase. "What's your deal?" He shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the ground. "Your wife," he said finally. "She's beautiful. That's all." I raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "She's wearing this necklace," he continued, "and it reminds me of one my grandmother used to wear. She passed away recently," so his voice trailed off. It was an odd explanation, but he seemed sincere. I nodded, acknowledging his loss. "Sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. After we finished our cigarettes, he turned to leave but stopped and added, "See you at the special event later. Maybe we'll even be on the same team." Then he walked off, leaving me standing there, cigarette still in hand. Team? I thought. What kind of event needed teams? I didn't like the sound of it, but I decided to let it go for now. Whatever they had planned, I'd find out soon enough. The evening took an unexpected turn when everyone was called into the main hall for an announcement. The atmosphere, which had been casual and light-hearted, suddenly became charged with anticipation. One of my wife's colleagues, the unofficial ringleader of the group, decided to make her entrance memorable. She slipped off her heels, climbed onto the table, and grabbed a microphone. I folded my arms, already unimpressed with the theatrics. "What now?" I muttered under my breath. The room quieted down as she began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," she started, her voice ringing out confidently, "it's time to reveal the surprise we've all been waiting for." There were scattered cheers and laughter, but I stayed silent, my patience already wearing thin. She took her time, milking the moment, before finally dropping the bombshell. "We're having a swinger party tonight," she announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My jaw clenched, and I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. Did I hear that right? I glanced at my wife, who was sitting beside me. She looked as stunned as I felt, her eyes wide with shock. Before I could say a word, she leaned in and whispered, "Look, let's just go to one of the rooms and be by ourselves. We don't have to participate in whatever this is." Her tone was pleading, as if she knew I was seconds away from losing my temper. Before I could respond, the rich kid, the same one who'd been a thorn in my side all evening, strolled over with his usual smug expression. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not your thing? Don't tell me you're too uptight for a little fun." That was it. Without a second thought, I spit in his face. The room went silent, and his smirk vanished instantly. "We're done here," I said, grabbing my wife's hand. "Let's go." She followed me out, but not without resistance. As soon as we were outside, she yanked her hand away and rounded on me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You didn't have to do that. You just embarrassed both of us in front of everyone." Her words came fast and sharp, her anger spilling over. "You're a heartless idiot who ruins everything." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "Listen," I said firmly. "If you think I'm going to stand there and tolerate that kind of nonsense, you've got another thing coming. These people are not your friends. They're not even decent. If you want to save this marriage, you're done with them. Do you understand me?" My voice was calm but unwavering. I wasn't asking for her opinion, I was laying down the law. Her expression shifted from anger to defiance. You can't just tell me who I can and can't be friends with, she argued. That's controlling and abusive. People's personal lives don't define who they are at work. You're overreacting. Her voice wavered slightly, but she held her ground. I took a step closer, lowering my voice but keeping my tone firm. Your company reflects who you are. If you want to surround yourself with people who think this kind of behavior is normal, that's on you. But if you want to stay in this marriage, you'll cut ties with them. This isn't a debate. She stared at me, her anger still simmering but now mixed with something else, maybe resignation. In the end, she didn't have much choice. She muttered something under her breath, then said, "Fine. Whatever. You win." Her tone was bitter, and I knew she wasn't happy about it. But I wasn't here to make her happy, I was here to protect what mattered. As we drove home, the silence between us was heavy. She was upset, but she'd agreed to my terms. For now, that was enough. After the incident at the event, my wife's behavior began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. She became more reserved, especially when it came to talking about work. Normally, she'd share stories about her colleagues and the day's events, but now her updates were vague, if she gave them at all. It was as though a wall had gone up between us, and I couldn't help but wonder what was behind it. At first, I chalked it up to lingering tension from the argument we'd had, but as the days went by, her odd behavior became harder to ignore. Her late nights at work were the first red flag. It started with the occasional delay, which she'd explain away as catching up on tasks or helping a colleague. But the frequency grew, and so did my suspicion. One evening, when she came home well past her usual time, I decided to confront her. "What's going on?" I asked bluntly. "You've been acting distant, and now these late nights. If this is about what happened at the party, just say so." She sighed, looking more annoyed than anything else. "I'm not talking to them anymore," she said, her tone defensive. "That's what you wanted, right? So there's nothing to tell. Work is just work." Her answer didn't satisfy me. "Then why the late nights?" I pressed. She hesitated, just long enough to make me more suspicious. Finally, she said, "My mom's been sick. She's getting older and she needs help around the house. I've been spending more time with her, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing." Her explanation seemed plausible, and for a moment, I felt a twinge of guilt for questioning her. Helping her mother was something she'd always been diligent about, especially when her mom's health was in decline. "All right," I said, softening my tone. "But if that's the case, why didn't you just tell me from the start?" She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't think it was a big deal. Besides, I figured you'd assume the worst." Her comment stung, but I let it go. Despite her explanation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her behavior around the house added to my unease. She spent hours on her phone, more than I'd ever seen before. At first, I thought she was just scrolling through social media or texting friends, but the intensity of her focus made me wonder if there was more to it. When I asked about it, she dismissed it as work-related or trivial chats. "You're overthinking," she'd say, but her evasiveness only deepened my concerns. Looking back, I realized that my earlier ultimatum might have been too heavy-handed. By cutting her off from those colleagues so abruptly, I might have inadvertently pushed her to hide things from me. It wasn't a comforting thought, but it made sense. If she'd been inclined to confide in me before, my actions might have made that harder for her now. Still, I wasn't about to ignore the signs. I started paying closer attention to the patterns in her behavior. The phone usage, the late nights, the reluctance to talk, it all painted a picture I didn't like. And then there was that nagging thought in the back of my mind, what if the rich kid from the party was somehow involved? He'd been too persistent, too smug. If he'd tried to worm his way back into her life, I needed to know about it. By the time I'd pieced everything together, I knew what I had to do. Confronting her directly hadn't gotten me anywhere, and waiting for her to open up on her own wasn't an option. If she was hiding something, the answers were likely on her phone. That night, after she fell asleep, I decided I'd take a look. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but I'd reached the point where I needed the truth, one way or another. After my wife had fallen asleep, I sat in the dimly lit bedroom, contemplating my next move. Her phone lay on the nightstand, the soft glow of its screen almost beckoning me. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but the unanswered questions and strange behavior had left me no choice. I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and began scrolling. My first stop was her group chat with her colleagues. To my surprise, there wasn't much there. Just a string of messages discussing another corporate outing, set to take place at a new cottage. The excitement in their words was evident. They seemed thrilled, but I couldn't understand why. The address for the event was listed in the chat, along with plans for food, drinks, and activities. It all seemed innocent enough, but something about their enthusiasm felt out of place. What could make a group of professionals this eager for what sounded like just another work event? I shook my head, unable to make sense of it. With no clear answers there, I moved on to check her private messages. That's when I saw it, a conversation with the rich kid from the party. My jaw tightened as I opened the thread. His last message was recent, asking her why she'd stopped attending their gatherings. "Why did you and your husband leave so abruptly that night?" he'd written. My heart sank as I read her reply. She'd been honest with him, saying, "My husband doesn't approve of me hanging out with you all. He's strict about these things, so I have to listen to him." Her tone was neutral, but the content stung. It wasn't the fact that she'd explained herself, it was the dynamic her words painted. His response was exactly what I'd expected. He reassured her, calling me controlling and backward. "Things can always change," he added. "We'll be here if you ever need us. You know the address." My hands clenched as I read those words. It was clear he thought he had an opening, that he was waiting for the right moment to exploit it. That only solidified my resolve. I exited the app and put the phone back where I'd found it. As I sat there, I considered my next steps. Her behavior had made it clear that something was going on, and now I had the address of their next gathering. The only question was how to proceed. Trust was already strained, and I knew confronting her without evidence would only make her defensive. I needed to act carefully. The following day, she mentioned her mother again, saying she planned to visit her and might be back late. Her tone was casual, almost too casual, as if she were testing how much I'd probe. I nodded and acted like it didn't bother me. "Take your time," I said. If she was lying, I needed to know for sure. After she left, I started doing my own research. My first step was to look into divorce attorneys. It wasn't something I wanted, but I knew I had to prepare for the possibility. If her actions confirmed my suspicions, I wouldn't waste any time. I jotted down a few names and made a mental note to call them if it came to that. For now, I had to stay focused. That evening, I decided to confirm her story. I picked up the phone and called her mother directly. "Hey, just checking in," I said. "How are you feeling?" Her voice was warm as she replied, "I'm fine, thank you." "Your wife is here now. She's in the bathroom, but everything's good." Relief washed over me. At least for tonight, her story checked out. I hung up, leaning back in my chair. For now, it seemed like things were as she'd said. But I couldn't ignore the bigger picture. Her behavior, the messages, the cottage plans, it all felt connected. I'd need to stay vigilant. All right, I thought to myself, we'll see where this goes. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, jolting me out of a light sleep. The number was unfamiliar, but I picked up anyway. On the other end, a man's voice, slurred and laughing hysterically, told me I needed to get over to a party immediately. "You have to see what your wife is up to," he said between bouts of laughter. "Trust me, you'll want to be here. It'll be hilarious." His tone and the situation felt off, and my mind instantly went to the worst possibilities. Without wasting a second, I grabbed my keys and headed for the car. The drive was tense, my grip on the steering wheel tightening with every mile. The address he gave was out in the middle of nowhere, the same cottage I'd seen mentioned in the group chat. By the time I arrived, I was on high alert. The guy who called me met me at the door, still laughing and clearly drunk. He gestured for me to follow him inside, his demeanor smug and taunting. I didn't like it, but I kept my cool and followed. The scene I walked into was worse than anything I could have imagined. There she was, my wife, in the middle of it all, surrounded by 6 men. The laughter and chaos in the room drowned out everything else, but my focus was razor sharp. I didn't make a sound, I just pulled out my phone and started recording. My hands were steady as I captured every detail. They were so absorbed in their debauchery that they didn't even notice me standing there. Eventually, one of the men, the same guy who'd led me inside, caught sight of me filming. His expression shifted from amusement to panic as he lunged for my phone. I sidestepped his grab and landed a solid punch to his face. He stumbled back and fell to the floor, clutching his nose. The room fell silent for a brief moment as the reality of my presence sank in. I turned to my wife, who had finally noticed me. Her face contorted with rage and embarrassment. "What the hell are you doing here?" she screamed. "You have no right to invade my privacy like this." Her words were like gasoline on a fire. "Your privacy?" I shot back, my voice cold and measured. "You call this a private moment? Fine, go ahead. Continue. Don't let me stop you." She opened her mouth to argue, but I'd already turned and was heading for the door. As I reached my car, I grabbed the bear spray I kept in the glove compartment. It was a precaution I'd never thought I'd use for something like this. The cottage had an open window on the side, just enough to provide access without drawing attention. I approached quietly, shaking the canister as I went. Peering through the window, I could see the chaos starting to resume inside. Perfect! Without hesitation, I began spraying the bear deterrent through the window, making sure to cover as much of the room as possible. The effect was immediate. Coughing and shouting erupted from inside as people scrambled to escape the stinging cloud. Some fell over furniture in their panic, while others clawed at their eyes, trying to find relief. I stayed long enough to ensure the spray had done its job before walking calmly back to my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, I watched the scene unfold through the rearview mirror. People were stumbling out of the cottage, gasping for air, their night thoroughly ruined. A small, satisfied smile crept onto my face. With the recording safely stored on my phone and the chaos behind me, I started the engine and drove away. The night had taken an unexpected turn, but I felt no remorse. Justice, in my mind, had been served. When I arrived back home, I didn't waste a second. The betrayal was fresh in my mind, and I wasn't about to let the night's events linger in my home any longer. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed my wife's belongings, and started stuffing them into garbage bags. Clothes, shoes, makeup, everything went in without a second thought. The anger in me burned hotter with every item I tossed. This wasn't just about clearing space, it was about reclaiming my dignity. Once the bags were full, I didn't stop there. I carried them to the window, yanked it open, and started throwing them out onto the lawn. One after another, they landed in a messy pile outside. The sight of her things scattered like trash felt oddly satisfying, a physical representation of what I thought of her betrayal. I was mid-throw with another bag when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up to the house. I looked outside and saw headlights illuminating the yard. The car doors slammed, and my wife stepped out, followed by a couple of the same men I'd seen at the cottage. They were yelling before they even got close to the door. I could hear their voices rising, accusing me of overreacting and demanding I let her back in. One of the men had the audacity to shout, "You're being unreasonable. She loves you, and you need to work this out." Their arrogance was staggering. I stepped outside, my expression cold and unyielding. "Work this out?" I said, my voice cutting through their noise. You expect me to stay married to someone who's been cheating on me, and you think I'll just accept it? Another one of them chimed in, if you don't, we'll make sure you regret it. This is your last chance to fix this. At that moment, one of them, likely emboldened by the others, said something about setting my house on fire if I didn't comply. That was enough for me. I didn't waste time arguing. I turned, walked back into the house, and grabbed my shotgun from the cabinet. When I stepped back outside, their bravado evaporated almost instantly. I aimed low, deliberately shooting into the dirt just inches from one of their feet. The sound was deafening, and the smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. He jumped back, stumbled, and nearly fell over himself trying to get away. The others were already retreating, their courage gone. You want to try that again? I asked, my voice calm but laced with menace. They didn't answer. Instead, they hurried back to their car, fumbling with the doors before peeling out of the driveway. I watched them go, ensuring they were well out of sight before lowering the gun. It was obvious their threats had been empty, but I'd made my point. This was my house, and I wasn't about to let anyone dictate what I should tolerate. A few hours later, she returned alone. Her shoulders slumped, and her face was streaked with tears as she stood in the yard, picking up her scattered belongings. Please, she said, her voice trembling. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Don't do this to us. I stood at the doorway, arms crossed, unmoved by her pleas. There's no us, I said firmly. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. This marriage is over. She begged for a second chance, but my decision was final. Her actions had destroyed any trust I'd had in her, and no amount of apologies or promises could undo that. As she gathered the last of her things, I turned and went back inside, closing the door behind me. My mind was clear. I'd be filing for divorce first thing in the morning, and there would be no turning back. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive, thanks to the video evidence I brought to court. When the judge saw the footage, there wasn't much left for debate. Her infidelity was undeniable, and it played a significant role in the final ruling. As a result, I came out ahead, keeping the majority of our shared assets and leaving her with the bare minimum. It was a harsh outcome for her, but I had no sympathy left to spare. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. After the house was sold, I moved into a modern apartment that suited my needs perfectly. It was spacious, well-lit, and in a good part of town. Setting up a new life wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I focused on my work and making the place feel like home. The freedom of being on my own again was refreshing, a clean slate after the chaos of the past few months. For a while, it felt like I could finally move on. But my ex-wife wasn't done making my life difficult. Not long after the dust settled, she launched a smear campaign among my family members. She claimed I doctored the video evidence using neural networks, accusing me of digitally altering her face to frame her for cheating. The accusations were absurd, but she said them with enough conviction to make some people listen. My sister and mother were the first to approach me about it, their concerns evident. She's saying you manipulated the video, my sister said, her tone hesitant. And that you hurt her. The implication hung in the air, and I could feel my temper rising. I kept my response measured but firm. You've known me your entire life, I said. Do you really believe I'd do something like that? My mother's silence stung, but I could see the doubt she was wrestling with. My father, on the other hand, saw through her lies immediately. She's a manipulative liar, he said bluntly. Don't let her get under your skin. His unwavering support was a relief, but the damage her words had caused was already done. I found myself embroiled in heated arguments with my family, defending my actions and my integrity. It was exhausting, but I refused to let her narrative take root. Eventually, I took matters into my own hands. I gathered evidence to disprove her claims, including technical reports verifying the authenticity of the video. I presented everything to my family in a calm, straightforward manner, making it clear that her accusations were baseless. The turning point came when I pointed out her lack of any real proof to back up her story. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. My mother and sister apologized once they realized the truth. They admitted they'd been swayed by her emotional manipulation and regretted doubting me. "We should have trusted you from the start," my mother said, her voice heavy with guilt. My sister, who'd been the most vocal in questioning me, took a month-long break from our relationship to process everything. It was a tense period, but I gave her the space she needed. When we eventually reconnected, the conversations were lighter, more genuine. The rift that my ex-wife had tried to create was healing. My sister reached out first, and we talked through everything in a way we hadn't been able to before. "I'm sorry for not believing in you," she said. I let her get in my head. I assured her that we could move forward, and we did. Rebuilding those relationships took time, but it was worth the effort. My family had always been important to me, and I wasn't about to let her lies destroy that bond. By the end of it all, we were stronger for having gone through it. The experience was a reminder of how easily trust can be shaken, but also how it can be restored when the truth comes to light. After everything that had happened, I wasn't about to let my ex-wife walk away unscathed. She'd tried to destroy my reputation among my family and left me no choice but to defend myself. But there was still one final card I had to play. The video evidence I'd used in court held more than just proof of her infidelity. It also exposed the other participants, including someone I'd recognized as the wife of her boss. That detail stuck with me, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I sat down and composed an email to her boss, attaching the video as proof. The message was concise but clear. I explained that this footage involved members of his team, including his wife, and suggested he review it carefully. It wasn't about revenge for its own sake, it was about consequences. People who engaged in such behavior, especially in professional circles, had to be held accountable. Once the email was sent, I leaned back and waited, confident that the fallout would be swift. It didn't take long to get a response. Her boss called me directly the next morning, his tone a mix of anger and disbelief. He confirmed that he'd seen the video and thanked me for bringing it to his attention. "I had no idea," he admitted. "This is unacceptable, and I'll be taking immediate action." His words were firm, and I could tell he meant it. He didn't try to downplay the situation or make excuses. It was clear that he intended to clean house. Within a week, the company made drastic changes. Nearly everyone involved in the video was let go, including my ex-wife. The only employees who stayed were those who hadn't participated in the event. While some might argue that losing so many people at once could hurt the company, her boss seemed determined to rebuild with fresh talent. From what I heard, they quickly hired replacements and moved forward without much disruption. It was a calculated risk, but one he was willing to take. The fallout extended beyond the workplace. My ex-wife's social circle began to unravel as the truth came to light. Those who had initially supported her started distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. She'd built her image on charm and manipulation, but now that facade was cracking. It was clear she hadn't expected her actions to have such far-reaching consequences. She didn't take it well. One evening, she called me in a fit of rage. "How could you do this?" she screamed over the phone. "You've ruined my life. You took away my job, my friends, everything. You're a monster." Her voice was shrill, and I could hear the frustration and desperation behind her words. But I remained calm. "You did this to yourself," I replied. "If you think you can betray people and walk away without consequences, you're mistaken. Consider this a lesson." Her anger shifted to self-pity. She tried to blame me for her loss of variety in life, as she put it, and accused me of being vindictive. "You're just bitter because I moved on," she said, trying to flip the narrative. But her words didn't hold any weight. I'd already moved on emotionally and wasn't about to let her guilt trip me into feeling otherwise. I ended the conversation on a firm note. "You wanted freedom, and now you have it," I said. "You're free to live with the consequences of your actions. Don't call me again." And with that, I hung up. It felt like closing a door on a chapter of my life that had dragged on far too long. I wasn't angry anymore, I was simply done. In the days that followed, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she was struggling to find a new job. Her reputation had taken a hit, and companies were hesitant to hire someone with such baggage. Meanwhile, I focused on my work and my life, content with the knowledge that I'd done what needed to be done. It wasn't about revenge, it was about setting things right and ensuring she couldn't continue her manipulative ways unchecked. Looking back, I felt a sense of closure. She'd tried to undermine me at every turn, but in the end, her own actions had been her undoing. I'd moved on, and so had my life. The lesson was clear: actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are exactly what's needed to bring about justice. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, my ex-wife eventually tried to reconnect with that rich kid she'd been so taken with. It didn't surprise me, she'd always had a knack for trying to land on her feet, even after burning bridges. According to the rumors, she thought she could pick up where they left off, but life had other plans. Whatever illusion she'd built about him being some kind of savior quickly fell apart when she realized he wasn't interested in any sort of loyalty. The story went that he cheated on her not long after they started seeing each other again. Typical behavior for someone like him, all charm and no substance. When she found out, he didn't even bother to deny it. Instead, he left her high and dry, moving on to his next conquest without a second thought. It was poetic, in a way. She'd betrayed me for someone who ended up treating her with even less respect. I couldn't muster much sympathy for her. She'd made her choices, and now she was reaping the rewards. It was clear that the fallout from her actions wasn't something she'd planned for. As much as I might have wanted to feel satisfaction at her misfortune, I found that I simply didn't care anymore. By that point, I'd moved on with my life and left all of that drama in the past where it belonged. Apparently, after things fell apart with him, she packed up and went to stay with her mother. That, too, didn't surprise me. Her mom had always been her fallback whenever life didn't go her way. It made sense that she'd retreat there once her plans fell apart. As far as I knew, she was still there, trying to figure out her next move. I hadn't seen or heard from her in months, and I had no intention of changing that. In some ways, it was a relief to have her completely out of my life. The silence was refreshing after everything we'd been through. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could focus entirely on myself without worrying about her schemes or drama. My life was simpler now, and I intended to keep it that way. Whatever path she chooses from here on out, it's her business. I've washed my hands of the situation, and I'm content to leave it behind. People like her and that rich kid always end up chasing their own tails, creating messes they can't clean up. Meanwhile, I've moved forward, and that's all that matters to me now.
My wife cheated on me with a 15-year friend during my work trip. I confronted them, got my revenge. I'm Steve, and my wife's Kate. We've been married for more than 3 years. The first year was really happy, the second was good, and the third had some issues. It might seem silly or childish, I can't say I disagree, but I'm not sure if you would react differently. We were in the middle of an argument. We've had a lot of those lately, Kate and I, but this one was really bad. I don't even know what it was about, something small like the laundry or an unpaid bill. Kate has this habit of bringing up irrelevant complaints during arguments, things that have nothing to do with what we're fighting about. It could be stuff from years ago, like when I didn't pick up her sister from a party, or just random things that occur to her to hit me with. This was one of those times. And you just never stop talking. Do you know that, Steve? She said this in a harsh tone. Nothing makes you happier than the sound of your own voice, even when we're, in bed. There was silence. Kate must have seen from my face that she went too far. I was hurt, so I just looked at her. I thought about saying I had no idea my talking during closeness bothered her. It's how I express my love and excitement. But then I decided not to say anything. Kate continued, saying my talking distracts her during closeness and turns her off. I was surprised. Why hadn't she mentioned this before? We've been married for over 3 years, and I thought she enjoyed my affectionate words. She talked less than I did in bed, but she always said a few words. After a long silence, I stood up and told Kate I'd try to only speak when it's important. Then I left the room. Update, I wasn't proud of my actions afterward. All I can say is I felt really hurt. The unexpected argument hit me hard. I thought if she wanted silence, then she would get silence. Our fights were getting worse. Despite still loving Kate, we found it harder and harder to be content with each other. There were fewer happy times and more tense moments, and arguments over small things. A major issue was my job as a sales rep for a plumbing supply company, requiring me to travel for about 3 weeks, 4 days a month. Kate didn't like me being away so much, but she knew this before we got married. She also wanted to start a family, which I resisted for another 2 years. I expected a promotion that would let me stop traveling. I just didn't want to have a baby until I could be home all the time. So those were the big issues. Lately, even tiny things seemed to trigger fights. The reservoir of love and goodwill seemed almost empty, and I didn't know why. One thing Kate said kept bothering me, that my talking during closeness was the opposite of what turned her on. Did that mean she was enjoying closeness with someone else? Someone who didn't talk, it seemed far, fetched until I thought about it more? During my last trip, about 10 days. Earlier, I couldn't reach her on the phone twice. The second time, she had her cell phone switched off when she should have been back from work. The next day, she said she went for a beer with friends, which seemed reasonable, except I called the house around 10:30 and she was still out. Also, in the past month, 3 times I answered the phone and the person hung up. Not a big deal, but it rarely happened before, so I got more suspicious and took action. For the next 2 weeks, Kate probably thought she was living with a mute. No small talk, no idle conversation, no words unless absolutely necessary. Instead of saying, "Could you pass the salt, honey?" I got up and got it myself. In response to, "What's the weather going to be like today?" I passed her the weather page of the newspaper. If she asked me to make dinner that night, all she got was, "Okay." When she left for work and said, "Goodbye, honey," I gave her a smile and a wave. It became a game to see how few words I could say to her in a day. Kate knew I was angry and hurt, and she knew why. At first, she didn't seem to care much, but after that, she started trying to make up. She didn't exactly apologize, that was rare in our house, but she became much more affectionate. Kisses greeted me in bed in the morning, on the way out for work, and at bedtime. Sometimes she leaned over to give me a hug while I was reading the paper over coffee in the morning, or rubbed my shoulders while we were watching TV. It was a funny thing, even as my anger gradually calmed down and nobody can stay white-hot angry over days, I kept saying as little as possible. Before speaking, I'd ask myself if I really needed to say it, and usually the answer was no. I was listening more, observing more, and keeping my thoughts to myself. About 10 days after the argument, Kate suggested we make love. Whether she wanted to or it was part of making up, I couldn't tell. After dinner, during which she told me some stories about work and I spoke no more than 6 words, she stood up and took me by the hand, urging me to leave the dishes for later. With a big, warm smile, she conveyed that there was something else she needed at that moment. As she led me back to the bedroom, I wondered if the distance between us had grown because of my silence, or if I was silent because we had already drifted so far apart. During the entire encounter, I hadn't uttered a word. As we coupled smoothly, easily, and familiarly, I remained completely silent, feeling a sense of unnatural coldness and distance. I wasn't even sure if it was what Kate truly wanted, but after that argument, I had no intention of saying a word. After we finished, I rolled off her, and she snuggled into me, emitting a happy, Without any verbal communication, we relaxed together for a while, still without exchanging any words. I couldn't discern what the experience had been like for her. For me, it felt cold and empty, and whether that was due to the silence or the growing distance between us remained uncertain. Update: after a few more days of minimal conversation, Kate became upset with me. One night during dinner, she expressed frustration, questioning my silence and whether I had anything to say. After a moment of thought, I responded that I thought this was what she wanted. She clarified, explaining that she desired a husband who communicates and shares feelings, not someone resembling a mannequin from a department store. Privately, I chuckled, thinking, "Good one, Kate." Last week she had complained about me talking too much, so I was making an effort to rectify that. Kate accused me of taking the silent treatment too far, labeling it the Silent Sam routine. I looked at her for a moment before speaking. Some of my confusion was intended to annoy her, and partly, I was genuinely puzzled. I honestly didn't know what she wanted. First, I talked too much, then, too little. How am I supposed to know what to do now? She glared at me, clearly very angry, insisting that I stop and be the man she married. I regretted my earlier words, stating that she doesn't talk too much. We were arguing. I was upset, and I just threw that at her. After a pause, I added, "All right, Kate, but I have to admit, your words got me thinking that maybe I do talk too much, or without thinking first about whether I really have anything to say." After a moment, I smiled at her, saying, "In a way, all this has been helpful." She smiled back warmly, her anger seemingly gone, and for a moment I felt the closeness between us that had been missing. I then brought up the topic of making love, genuinely seeking to understand. I asked if she meant what she said about not talking during closeness. Rather than answering my question, Kate left the table. For the rest of the evening, she gave me the cold shoulder, which didn't seem fair despite my honest attempt to understand her feelings. The next morning brought a more hopeful atmosphere. Kate had stepped back from her initial attack, expressing a desire for communication. Unfortunately, her focus remained on the end of the conversation, evident in her glares and tight-lipped phrases at breakfast. We endured a few more days of minimal communication, ironic this time, as she was giving me the silent treatment. After 3 to 4 days, Kate's mood drastically changed again. She came home from work looking very upset and headed straight for the shower. Over dinner, she was distracted, saying little and frequently losing track of my conversation. This wasn't the angry, silent treatment anymore. She was clearly preoccupied with something. But when I asked her if something was wrong, and I asked several times, she only mentioned a problem at work. I noticed, though, that she wouldn't meet my eyes when she said it. Unsure of what was bothering her, I decided to wait and see. The next day, I received a call at work. Ernie Matazzo confirmed my suspicions about Kate having an affair. I thanked him, left work, and went home. Looking at the photos, the only surprise was the guy, Adam, who hadn't been my best man but was one of my groomsmen. He'd always admired Kate, and I'd never considered him a threat. I felt cold and empty, like the last time Kate and I were in bed together. I sat for a long time, contemplating everything, and pulled out the photos, finding them unchanged from the first time I put them away. Update: when Kate arrived home, she found me seated on the couch, seemingly idle. I remained quiet as she greeted me, my expression crafted to appear neutral rather than angry. Her inquiry about my unusual behavior grew more pointed, a blend of concern and annoyance evident in her edgier tone as she probed further, sensing that something was amiss. I maintained my silence. Frustration welled within her as she pressed for an explanation, insinuating a return to the silent treatment of the past. In response, I sat up, cutting through the tension with a direct question. I asked her how long she had been dating him. Kate, taken aback, recoiled in shock and retreated a step. Perplexed, she took a seat across from me, seeking to understand my accusation. Her attempts to read my expression proved futile. The atmosphere thickened as she continued to deny any involvement with someone else. Clasping her hands tightly in her lap as she implored me to reveal the source of my accusations, her plea, laden with frustration, suggested that I harbored a guilty conscience. Unyielding, I presented an envelope containing a photograph, a damning image of Kate on Adam's bed. She looked at it briefly, dropped it in surprise, and recoiled as though it were a threat. Blushing, she retreated into her chair, avoiding eye contact. In the face of my persistent silence, she decided to change the subject, heading for the bedroom. However, I intercepted her with the incriminating photo. She hesitated, and unable to escape my unrelenting gaze, she finally met my eyes with a silent plea. "How long?" I reiterated. Her response was a withdrawal into herself, arms wrapped tightly around her as she shook her head. The silence lingered, and she eventually appealed to me, requesting that I spare her from discussing the matter. Declaring my decision to leave, I moved toward the bedroom to pack. In a desperate plea, she implored me to wait, promising to disclose everything. Relenting, I resumed my seat, observing her as she struggled to maintain eye contact. Unable to endure the silence, she confessed, apologizing and expressing remorse as she pleaded with me not to leave. I remained seated, meeting her gaze with an unwavering expression. She averted her eyes, and after a moment, she mustered the courage to look back at me, tearfully admitting that Adam had told her I was also involved. Surprised, I refrained from questioning her and gestured for her to continue. Kate explained that a month earlier she had encountered Adam at the supermarket. He, being charming and friendly, had offered her companionship in my absence, arriving at our house with pizza and wine. They spent a casual evening together, misled by Adam's claim that I too was engaged in similar actions. Towards the end, he started acting worried and concerned. When Kate questioned him about it, he claimed I had been unfaithful. He did an impressive job at acting, appearing reluctant, with his head hanging, avoiding an eye contact with me. According to him, you and he had a conversation a couple of weeks earlier where you confessed about a girl you were involved with during your trips. He provided convincing details about her appearance, where you met, and how great you said she was in bed. I started crying, and Adam consoled me, expressing admiration for my beauty and how he couldn't fathom how any man could cheat on me. A little while later, we ended up in bed together, and I only found out yesterday that the entire story was false. I waited, expressionless. She continued, her expression now more somber than before. "I found myself in his apartment," she said. "After he had this smug demeanor. He brought up the notion that if it weren't for your involvement with Julia, we wouldn't have realized how well we connect. I raised the issue of inconsistency, reminding him that during our initial conversation about your supposed lover, he had mentioned the name Joanne. He couldn't recall any of the details, like her appearance or how you met. Frustrated, I screamed at him to tell me the truth. Did you really cheat on me? He laughed, admitting it was just a story to get me into bed. Kate's face turned red with anger. I got up, threw on my clothes, and berated him, calling him out for making a fool of me, she continued. He just lay there, smiling, unapologetic and unremorseful. I couldn't believe what I had done. She trailed off, her voice choked with emotion, and then she broke down, sobbing with her face in her hands, her body heaving. The urge to comfort Kate was overshadowed by a cold emptiness. Was she truly that naive, or had our love deteriorated to the point where she was willing to believe even the most absurd stories? And then there was my rage at Adam, a friend of 15 years. I sat in silence while Kate sobbed. After about 5 minutes, I stood up. Kate watched me fearfully as I took her cell phone from her purse, put it in my pocket, and went to the bedroom and kitchen, unplugging the phones and putting them in a bag under my arm. Before departing, I glanced back at Kate and conveyed that I would return. I instructed her not to leave and cautioned against engaging in conversations with anyone. Despite my quiet tone, she appeared terrified and affirmed my instructions with a nod. Update on the way to Adam S. I focused on controlling my breath to appear calm and friendly. When Adam opened his door, he seemed surprised and nervous. Without hesitation, I invited him for a couple of beers and suggested watching the Phillies, saying Kate was at a meeting. Though he observed me carefully, he put on a friendly demeanor and agreed to my proposal. We sat in his living room, chatting amiably while the game played in the background. Keeping the conversation light, I noticed Adam gradually relaxing, thinking it was a casual visit. However, I remained uncertain about the situation. It took more than an hour to steer the conversation toward relationships. I inquired about the ladies he was dating, making him momentarily nervous, but my reassuring smile prompted him to share details about a girl from work he'd been seeing casually. I mentioned a talkative college girlfriend, and Adam took the bait, agreeing that actions speak louder than words during intimate moments. Laughing, he boasted about revealing the desires of many girls, expressing satisfaction. Leaning in, I asked about Kate's preferences, catching him off guard. After a moment of shock, he tried to laugh it off, but I kept pressing him with a smile. He finally agreed to be quiet, looking at me fearfully. Expressing my disbelief, I confronted him about betraying our friendship and deceiving my wife to have an affair with her. Downplaying it, he claimed it wasn't a big deal, arguing, she's just a woman. He trailed off uncertainly, looking at my face. Staring at him in disbelief, I questioned how I had ever been friends with him. Asserting that things were better out in the open, I insisted he tell me everything about his deceitful game with Kate. Having already talked to her, I warned that lying wouldn't work. Wide-eyed and genuinely afraid, Adam nodded at me, signaling his readiness to talk. He recounted the story, aligning closely with what Kate had said. He had always found her attractive and had been flirting with her for several months whenever he encountered her. He was single. One week he bumped into her at the supermarket and saw his chance. Initially thinking he could seduce her, he fabricated a story about my affair. When it became apparent she wouldn't cheat on me, he deliberately angered her and made her feel sorry for herself, making it easier to get her into bed. They met about 5 more times, always at his place. The first encounter was great because she was upset about my alleged affair, she cried. However, the subsequent times were fantastic, exactly as he described. When he noticed my disapproval, he abruptly stopped talking. I had cut his hair almost to the roots by then, finding satisfaction in picturing him hiding his head with hats for weeks. Coldly, I inquired if it was over. After a brief hesitation, he admitted it was and shared that she found out about the fabricated story. Unable to recall the name of the supposed girl I was dating, she got angry and left. I was ready to leave, feeling empty. Although I could have pressed for more details, I decided against it. I informed Adam that our friendship was over, warning against retaliation. We agreed not to involve the police. He nodded, looking more humiliated than angry, and requested to be released. Smiling, I assured him I'd leave the apartment door open, allowing him to free himself in about an hour. I walked away without turning back. Update: upon my return, Kate was seated on the couch in her bathrobe, her wet hair indicating recent distress. As I moved around the apartment, fixing the phones, she remained visibly scared and unhappy. Taking a seat across from her, we exchanged glances, but I maintained my silence. Eventually, she inquired about my actions, to which I explained the conversation with Adam, assuring her that I hadn't resorted to violence and expressing doubt about hearing from him anytime soon. Despite acknowledging that she almost wished I had confronted him physically, she recognized the potential consequences. Troubled, she sought to move past the situation, admitting her foolishness and asking for forgiveness. I looked at her for a prolonged moment before responding, our pattern of saying very little to each other becoming a habit. "I dawn to know," I finally replied, and it was an honest admission. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to cry. The following morning, Kate entered the kitchen, expressing delight at the breakfast and coffee set on the table. Her joy faded abruptly upon noticing the 2 large suitcases near the door. Distraught, she questioned my departure, pleading with me not to leave. Instead of leaving without a word, I served her a cup of coffee and persuaded her to sit across from me. "Kate, it's over," I declared. I admitted uncertainty about what had transpired or why, but emphasized that our relationship had deteriorated. Despite acknowledging our initial compatibility, I highlighted a year of impatience, snappiness, and constant fighting. I pointed out that her choice to believe Adam's dubious story about my infidelity and her subsequent actions indicated a departure from the woman I had married. I suggested she must have been on the verge of straying for our relationship to reach this point. Pausing, I waited for her response, but she cried silently, holding her face in her hands. When I ceased speaking, she looked up at me pleadingly. I offered her an opportunity to speak, to prove me wrong, to outline a path to revive our love. Regrettably, she remained silent, merely gazing at me and crying. I headed to the door, bidding her farewell as I picked up my suitcases and departed. My wife suggested an open marriage to hide her cheating, but I caught her and fought back. Doubt lingers when resorting to desperate measures. What actions could have steered clear of this situation? What steps might have prevented my current predicament? I was fairly certain my choices were limited. How do you make an adult realize their actions risk destroying everything they cherish? You can't coerce them into anything, you can only helplessly witness and handle the aftermath. That's where I found myself. My affectionate wife believed this would strengthen us, showcasing our love's depth and significance. I perceived it as a testament to her weak affection, highlighting her selfishness and indulgence. I'm just an average man, leading an ordinary life. I'm not a resilient, tender, romantic hero. Like anyone else, I have flaws. I often focus too much on myself, work excessively, and occasionally express unwarranted anger. It's not intentional, it just happens. I'm only human. Such is life. Work and events often disrupt the flow. Amanda and I have been married for 19 years, enjoying closeness moments 2 or 3 times a week. It was always pleasurable, and we shared the enthusiasm for more when time allowed. Hobbies like football, good books, or TV shows, along with parental responsibilities, sometimes diverted our attention, yet we made time when necessary or when desires struck. Our marriage sailed smoothly, our finances improved, and our daughters, Olivia and Audra, aged 16 and 14, added joy to our lives. While I may have considered myself ordinary, they were something extraordinary. Life was flourishing until my wife entertained unconventional ideas. She labeled our bed life as plain vanilla and insisted on spicing things up. Despite my satisfaction, I agreed to play along. Initially, it involved experimenting with different positions, which I found enjoyable due to my athleticism and good shape. However, the novelty wore off after a few times. Then came the phase of role-playing, a concept I couldn't fathom its origin. Girlfriends, women's magazines, or some misguided TV show perhaps. It was fun for about 3 times, but eventually, it seemed impractical. Concentrating on a hot woman while trying to maintain a Leonardo DiCaprio character or remember she was Scarlett Johansson became challenging. I refused to continue, and suddenly she expressed displeasure. She inquired about the last time I went on a date. I replied that just the past Friday, I took her to that Italian place she wanted to try. We went to the movies, and her mom looked after the girls overnight. As she reminded me, clarifying that she didn't mean with her, she asked how long it had been since I went out with someone else. I questioned if she was accusing me of something. She quickly assured me that she wasn't, and wondered if I remembered the name of the last girl I went out with besides her. Confirming that I did, I mentioned her name. Was Donna. About 2 weeks after I met her, we had a big argument about that date. When she asked if I ever missed it, I laughed and said, "God, no." I recalled how awful the whole dating thing was. Not the date itself, which was pretty good. Working up the nerve to ask a girl out, worrying about being shot down, awkward first conversations, it was traumatic as hell, more like absolutely terrifying. She then asked what brought this on. I explained that I was just wondering if she ever felt like she'd like to go out on a date with someone else. She assured me that she had never felt like that. She recalled being extremely upset when I went out with Donna, reminding me that she told me she wanted us to be exclusive. I agreed, mentioning that I wanted the same. I added that if I felt differently, I wouldn't have asked her to marry me. Being married, I explained, means you don't go on dates with people other than your spouse. She dropped the subject, and I didn't hear any more about it for a month. It was a Friday night, and we had just finished making love, without any role-playing or gimmicks. It was just us, a man and his wife, enjoying each other. I came twice, and she must have climaxed half a dozen times. We lay there in post-pleasure bliss. Then she brought up something that disrupted the mood. Amanda mentioned how Sibra was looking at me tonight and suggested that she wanted me to ask her to dance. Sibra is a friend from Amanda's workplace. I assured Amanda that it was flattering but emphasized that I only wanted to dance with her. She shared that she told Sibra that she wouldn't be jealous if I asked her. In response, I said that it was nice of her but made it clear that I had no intention of asking Sibra to dance. Amanda then asked if she would be jealous if I danced with another man. I attempted to lighten the mood by joking that her brother would be okay, but she didn't find it amusing. She clarified that she had never cared if I danced with guys who asked nicely and kept their hands where they belong. She inquired if there was someone at the event I wanted to dance with. I replied that I didn't remember anyone asking me, and she accepted my response, stating that she was just wondering. I had no clue where this was headed, but I wasn't comfortable with it. Doubting my ability to sleep, I got up and went to the den, engrossed in a video game. She appeared at the door, observing me for a moment, but I didn't meet her gaze. She returned to bed, and I joined her once she was asleep. Everything remained quiet for 2 months, until Angela's promotion party at the White Rhino with a great band. We all sat in a big circular booth, and Amanda was talking to Sibra. Corwin, Amanda mentioned that Sibra wanted to dance and asked if I could be a gentleman and dance with her. Recalling a conversation from 2 months ago, I found myself in an awkward position. While valuing Sibra's friendship and not wanting to hurt her feelings, I wasn't keen on dancing with her. The prospect of her lush body against mine raised concerns, but I wasn't sure how to gracefully decline. Although I enjoyed dancing, I wasn't confident in my abilities, especially compared to Sibra, who moved gracefully like a big cat. Feeling there was no good way out, I stood up and mentioned that I thought they were playing our song. Sibra joined me, her brown thighs visible below the short blue dress. As the song ended, the band started a slow number, and I wondered why now. Sibra fit against me seamlessly, and I could feel her bust against my chest, with her black curls nearly covering my face. She smelled nice, and when she looked up at me, her big brown eyes were like liquid pools, and her teeth flashed white against her dusky complexion. She wasn't a dark black girl, more like a coffee with cream color. After the dance, Sibra expressed gratitude, mentioning that Amanda said I wouldn't mind dancing with her. I complimented her dancing skills but admitted that I did mind, explaining that while I liked her a lot and considered her the sweetest girl I knew, dancing with her was not a good idea for me. She giggled and assured me that I was safe with her, expressing love and acknowledging that if I weren't married, she'd be all over me. However, she emphasized the importance of friendship and suggested we just enjoy that one dance. I squeezed her a little, and we finished the song. When we got back to the booth, Amanda wasn't there. I looked around and spotted her black and white dress. She was on the floor with some young Nordic-looking guy, laughing up into his face, and his hands were lower than they should have been. She noticed me looking for her, smiled, and shot me a wave. I was pissed, very pissed, in fact. She had set me up with Sibra so she could dance with that idiot. I threw a couple of 20s on the table and started walking toward the exit. Sibra watched me halfway to the door, then came running after me. I stopped, and she, a bit out of breath, asked where I was going. I informed her that we were being played. Amanda had been talking about dating other people and asking me if I ever thought about it. This was a test, and she set me up by getting me to dance with her, giving her an excuse to dance with Romeo inside. She asked what I was doing, and if I was just going to leave Amanda there. I affirmed that I intended to leave her. She grabbed my arm, feeling like a heel, and apologized. I reassured her, saying I didn't like being played any more than she did. She asked me to take her back to my house so she could get her car. As we were almost home, my phone buzzed, but I ignored it. Sibra gave me a look when her phone rang, and she answered it. She told Amanda they were almost at my house and explained that it wasn't her idea, she rode with us and wasn't about to be stranded. Sibra warned Amanda not to put her in that position and ended the call. She then informed me that Amanda wanted me to go back and get her. I expressed my desire for a wife who didn't play stupid games, sighing and questioning where this had come from. Sibra explained that it was Marcy from work who had been talking about having an open marriage, claiming it made their bed life better. She and her husband, Herb, hardly talked and spent their time trying to involve their friends. Amanda fell for it, and Sibra believed she was trying to set us up. I was surprised when Sibra mentioned that Amanda knew she loved me and had always been attracted to me. I nearly choked and apologized for the awkward situation. Sibra expressed that she found me gorgeous but emphasized being a one-woman kind of guy, not good at sharing toys. She reassured me, questioning why she should be sorry, as she had nothing to do with Amanda's actions. I had the opportunity to dance with my dream woman, and I felt no regret about it. I assured her that I would let her know what happened, and she left in her car. Entering the house, I thought for a moment, then gathered my belongings from the master bath and relocated them to the one in the guest room. I also retrieved my work items and placed them there. Locking the door, I went to sleep. Sleep possibly aided by the drinks I'd consumed. I was partially awakened by the slamming door downstairs and echoing footsteps in the hallway. The doorknob to the bedroom twisted a few times, followed by a tap on the door. I heard Amanda's stage whisper, cautious not to disturb the nearby sleeping girls, asking what was going on. The tapping and whispering persisted for about 10 minutes before her footsteps retreated to our bedroom, or what used to be ours. Strangely, I found myself disliking the bed in the guest bedroom. In an attempt to slip away before she woke up, perhaps a coward's plan, I failed. She descended the stairs while I packed files into my briefcase. She sputtered, clearly angry, questioning what was wrong with me. I retorted, suggesting that maybe she should be asking herself that question. Her voice rose as she asked what that was supposed to mean. I picked up my briefcase, stating that everything I did was in reaction to what she did. I expressed not wanting to look at her right now, emphasizing how close she was to making me permanently angry. Instructing her to get her act together, ensure all her points were checked off, and be ready to talk about it when I got home, I mentioned that I would pick up the girls and take them to Mom's house to settle the matter. Her face went pale, and she claimed to have no idea what I was talking about, suggesting the possibility of having something planned for the night. I told her it was up to her, stating that if she was interested in fixing what's broken, she should be ready and stop with the excuses. I added that if she was fine with the way things were, she could do whatever she wanted. I concluded by telling her to move her belongings into the spare bedroom because I liked my bed, making it clear she wasn't welcome in the same bed as me. She puffed up, but I left her there and went to work. I picked up the girls from school, and they happily went to Graham's for the evening. I informed Mom that Amanda and I were having some problems and needed some time to ourselves. She hugged me and expressed her love. I was grateful not to have to answer a bunch of questions. Amanda was there when I got home. She had made cookies, and a plate of them and a cup of coffee awaited me. Standing up, she clung to me for a moment, kissed my cheek, and sat down beside me on the sofa. I helped myself to a cookie, oatmeal with chocolate chips and mandams. It seemed like we were off to a good start, and I hated to spoil all this amicability. I addressed Amanda, expressing my disapproval of the unpleasant situation she created the previous night. I emphasized that what she did was not only hurtful to me, but also embarrassing for both of us and disrespectful to Sibra, who was supposed to be her friend. Amanda had difficulty making eye contact and apologized for her actions. Reflecting on my own behavior, I recognized that I shouldn't have handled the situation that way. My intention had been to open up communication with her, as she had consistently shut me down before. I considered this approach a way for her to contemplate alternative perspectives. In response to my question about possibilities, Amanda hesitated briefly before blurting out that she had been thinking about trying to date other people. Responding to her revelation, I told her there were several problems with that idea, the first being that both of us happened to be married. She argued that other married people do it, citing open marriages as a way to strengthen love. Skeptical, I questioned her sources, asking for a name. She mentioned Marcy and Herb, claiming they have an open marriage and that it strengthened their relationship. I doubted the authenticity of her information and suggested looking it up on Google to verify. She seemed a little shocked but agreed to sit beside me as I fired up my laptop. After typing in how many people have open marriages and clicking on the first link, we discovered that, according to a survey, less than 1% of Americans have an open marriage. Checking several other links yielded the same result, less than 1%. She seemed to have anticipated something different and mentioned that it was still a significant number, estimating at least 3 million. I disagreed, expressing doubt that many children are married, open or otherwise. Suggesting a different approach, I proposed typing in how many Americans expect their partners to be faithful. After clicking the link, we discovered that more than 95% of Americans expect fidelity. I pondered, so what do you suppose that means? She opined, I guess that most people aren't very open-minded. I thought there'd be more people with alternative lifestyles. I hear about it all the time. I wonder how many of those open marriages end in divorce. Despite her reluctance, I insisted, well, I did, and I wanted her to know. I then typed in how many open marriages end in divorce. The answer revealed that 92% of open marriages end in divorce in 5 years or less. I analyzed the statistics, saying, okay, let's see. Less than 1% of Americans are in an open marriage. That means that out of 1 million people, fewer than 10,000 are in open marriages. 92% of open marriages end in divorce. That means that out of that 10,000, there are 800 that don't end in divorce in 5 years. That's 800 out of 1 million. I asked Amanda to do the calculations and consider the odds of success for open marriage, especially when 92% of 1% fail. She admitted that the chances weren't very good. I pointed out that the few successful ones are those where both parties are willing. I directed her to the screen, emphasizing that 100% of marriages where one party is coerced into it fail. I made it clear that our situation would fall into that category since I wasn't willing to participate. I explained how my feelings of resentment, competitiveness, jealousy, insecurity, betrayal, and lack of security would impact us if I were to allow this. I expressed that the only reason I would endure such painful absurdity is if I were desperate to keep her, but I reassured her that I'm not that desperate. I mentioned that other women are attracted to me, citing an encounter from the previous night. I stated that if I were a pathetic loser or a sick individual, I might be interested in playing her game. But I clarified that I'm not that man. I made it clear that I would prefer her to shoot me in the head than break my heart. Amanda weakly responded that she didn't think everything on the internet could be believed. I acknowledged her point, stating that a good bit of it was probably misinformation, especially the part about many people having open marriages, which I suggested she shouldn't believe. I questioned her trust in Marcy, asking if she believed everything Marcy told her, and pointed out Marcy's history of multiple divorces. When Amanda didn't know about Marcy's husband, I pressed further, learning that Marcy had been divorced 4 times. Incredulously, I remarked that Amanda was taking marriage advice from a 4-time loser, to which she protested, explaining that Marcy and Herb had a strong marriage. Expressing my disgust with the situation, I asked Amanda about the source of all this information. She revealed that Marcy talked about it all the time, and I also discovered that Marcy and Herb hardly spoke to each other, spending their time trying to engage in closeness activities with their friends. Expressing my frustration, I questioned Amanda about her actions, asking her how she thought this situation would end. When she suggested that our bed life had been stale lately, I disagreed, stating that I had been perfectly happy. I further pointed out that her desire to play games had made the situation weird, referencing the last time and how she had climaxed 6 times. I questioned if those were Marcy's ideas, and her expression confirmed they were. I reacted strongly, expressing disbelief and frustration, emphasizing our strong marriage and rejecting the idea. She argued that it could be good and exciting, suggesting we share experiences. I responded, calling it a nightmare and challenging her claim about men's fantasies, suggesting she Google it. I made it clear that any involvement in such matters would mean the end of our relationship. Amanda looked shocked and sought clarification on what "we're through" meant. She questioned if it meant divorce and expressed disappointment, believing our marriage meant more. I echoed her disappointment, expressing doubt about the strength of our marriage based on her discussion of such matters. I conveyed that her discussion of such matters made me believe our marriage didn't hold much significance for her. I questioned what she would tell our daughters about Mom and Dad potentially splitting up, refuting her notion that it would be because I couldn't accept her having other relationships. I asserted that the truth would be that their mother didn't love their father enough to keep her marriage vows and ensure a loving home for them. I accused her of prioritizing her desires over the well-being of our family. As our anger escalated, she asserted her determination for this to happen, stating it was inevitable. I responded, refusing to accept it, and warning of the consequences. I asserted that she was mistaken and emphasized that our marriage wouldn't survive her involvement with someone else, stating that I'd consult a lawyer the moment she went through with it. I presented her with options: forget everything for a quick divorce, or schedule therapy sessions to understand her irrational behavior. I expressed my skepticism about the success of counseling, labeling her actions as a major mistake that would make everyone miserable. I attributed her misguided ideas to Marcy's influence, and warned that positive outcomes were unlikely. I made it clear that I wouldn't sit idly by, emphasizing the potential suffering for everyone involved. I questioned her about her plans and challenged her actions. She taunted me, insisting on her freedom, and claimed I couldn't stop her. She argued I wouldn't divorce her out of fear of losing too much, and threatened to take the girls and the house, leaving me with alimony and child support. In response to her taunts, I urged her to think about the situation and not do anything foolish. Despite her claims of love, I resisted her proposal, emphasizing that the potential excitement she suggested would only lead to risks and downsides. I stood firm, expressing the gravity of the situation and rejecting her plea to give it a try. She stood up, approached my chair, and tried to embrace and kiss me. I pushed her hands away, stood up, and said, "Don't touch me. I need to think about this. I'll let you know what I decide." I lied. I didn't need time to contemplate. I needed to organize my strategy. She was probably correct about the complexities of divorcing her. The whole system is messed up. I needed to make some moves. I left her, went to the master bedroom, and locked the door. After spending 30 minutes on the computer and 10 on the phone, I had a financial plan. The problem was the girls. Under Georgia law, where we lived in Atlanta, children over 14 get to choose their custodial parent. I was confident about Audra, my daddy's princess. Olivia loved me, but she also held her mother in high regard. I doubted Audra would go with Amanda, and I hoped Olivia wouldn't want to be separated from her sister. I was betting that if I could make them aware of Amanda's plans and how she intended to use them as leverage for this open marriage, they would want nothing to do with her. It was cynical, and I hated every thought I was having, but I wasn't the one changing the rules. If Amanda had come to me before our marriage, expressing her desire to remain faithful for 19 years and then explore other relationships, would I have married her? Absolutely not. I would have left immediately. She knew it, and she would have done the same. She wanted to change the rules and force me into compliance, resorting to extortion tactics. The conversation unfolded 2 nights later, with Amanda beginning by offering an apology that I wasn't inclined to accept. I questioned her about the decision to see a therapist and engage in marriage counseling when she denied having any issues and shifted the blame to me for planning to be with other men. I countered, pointing out the contradiction. She insisted she wasn't planning anything specific, just suggesting we have the option if it came up. In response, I shared a different perspective, revealing that I had opportunities to cheat occasionally throughout the years, but resisted due to a commitment to a plan of loyalty in marriage. I highlighted the importance of planning for a successful marriage and criticized her lack of commitment. I expressed concern about the impact on our promises to each other, our children, and even to God. Despite her hissing response, I questioned how the girls would perceive her betrayal, asserting that she wouldn't be telling them anything. Later that day, Amanda threatened that, as the mother, she would undoubtedly get custody of the kids, ensuring I would never see them again. She vowed to make visitations difficult, cautioning me not to say a word to them. After a heated exchange, she glared at me, stormed off, and created enough commotion for anyone on the stairs to hear. A couple of faint gasps and a muffled sob. When I reached the stairs, the girls were no longer there. I went to Audra's vacant room and proceeded down the hall to Olivia's room, where I heard hushed voices inside. Upon knocking, Olivia asked what I wanted, and I requested to come in. She opened the door, and both of them had obviously been crying. Sitting between them, I embraced them both and expressed regret that they had to witness such a conversation. I explained to them my belief that they wouldn't believe me unless they heard the conversation themselves. Olivia reassured me, saying it wasn't my fault, placing the blame on her mother. She mentioned not initially believing me, but now understanding the situation. Audra expressed disbelief at her mother's actions, questioning how she could do such a thing to me and to them. I admitted not knowing the exact motivation, stating that Amanda had been influenced by negative influences at work and had made a firm decision to go through with it. I shared my unsuccessful attempts to dissuade her and mentioned her lack of concern. Concerned about her well-being, Audra asked if Amanda was unwell, to which I responded that I had no clue about her current motivations. I mentioned suggesting therapy and marriage counseling, but Amanda showed no interest. Audra asked what they should do, and I advised them to do nothing for the time being. I explained my plan to wait until Amanda believed I had given up, anticipating her going on a date. At that point, we would be prepared to leave. I expressed doubts about her willingness to listen, even if I attempted to talk her out of it. I asked both of them if they were aligned with my decision or if they wanted to stay with their mother. Audra exchanged glances with her sister before declaring, "No, Dad, we're going with you." My heart lifted, finding solace in the support of my children after 19 years of disappointment. Over the next 2 months, Amanda and I barely communicated, assuming roles of distant roommates who harbored little affection for each other. The spare bedroom became her sleeping quarters, while I occupied what had once been our shared space. Despite my efforts to engage her in conversation and dissuade her from her chosen path, our interactions were strained. One evening, as we worked together in the garden, I broached the subject. I questioned the success of her plan, asking if our marriage was truly strengthening, where the passionate lovemaking she had envisioned was, and if the situation was as exciting and fulfilling as she had anticipated. She glanced at me, and for the first time I noticed a hint of doubt in her eyes, quickly replaced by anger. She snapped back, asserting that the situation was a result of my behavior. I expressed my disapproval of my wife planning to engage with others, emphasizing that it wasn't a scenario I welcomed. In response, she insisted that I was the one at fault. During our heated exchange, she practically shouted that I needed to consider the positive aspects of the situation. According to her, everything could be perfect if I let go of my stubborn pride. I questioned the idea of perfection and for whom it would be ideal. From my perspective, the current situation was far from perfect and certainly not favorable for me. I challenged her assertion that she loved me more, emphasizing that my love for her was expressed through granting her freedom while maintaining my commitment. I perceived her desire for exploration and boundary pushing as selfishness rather than an expression of love. I made it clear that my love for her was reflected in my decision not to engage in relationships with others, and if she truly loved me, she would do the same. I questioned Amanda about when she stopped loving me, to which she tearfully denied it and claimed her love for me had grown stronger. I challenged her notion of love, suggesting that her actions felt like driving a stake into my heart. In response, she became furious, announcing her plan to go to a club with a colleague, Bill White, on Friday night. She insisted that I join them, promising it would be an exciting experience. Reluctantly, I agreed, stating that since she was going to do it anyway, I might as well go along. As she rushed across the garden, she embraced me tightly, expressing gratitude for my willingness to participate. Despite her assurances, I was already filled with regret, finding the situation unbearable. Contemplating seeking support from Sebra, I decided to give her a call. It became evident that Sebra was furious upon learning about the plan. She expressed her anger, stating that she had no idea she was being set up to be with me when Mandy invited her to go clubbing with Bill White. Upon hearing the slang number, she vowed to confront Mandy. When I requested her help and trust, assuring her that I needed her assistance in this critical moment as I was planning to leave Mandy, Sebra initially expressed her distrust. After calming her down, I explained my plan to pretend to be okay with the situation and asked her to play along by going home with me. She hesitated for a moment before asking what I had in mind. She laughed and questioned the sincerity of my plan, expressing doubt that it might be a devious plot to get her into my house. Amused, I admitted that it indeed was such a plan and clarified that I needed her assistance in moving the girls to my new place while I retrieved our belongings from the house. Surprisingly, she found the vengeful aspect of the plan appealing and agreed to participate. Throughout the week leading up to Friday, Amanda engaged in closeness moments as if there were no tomorrow. On Friday, I emphasized once more before heading to work whether she was absolutely certain about the decision and suggested she could still call off the plan. I reminded her of the enjoyable week we had spent together. However, she remained resolute, assuring me that we could discuss it afterward if needed. She expressed gratitude for my willingness to go along with her plan and assured me that the upcoming night would be the best yet. She danced her way out of the bedroom. She knew I was going to love this, right? I thought sourly. Let's get this day over with. When Sebra stopped by the house on Friday evening, she was absolutely stunning. Amanda was cute, petite, and slender, with a face that belonged on a teenager. Sebra was in a whole different league. She was tall, and she had one of those bubble butts you hear so much about and almost never see. Amanda was a bit flat back there. Sebra wore a short, tight red sheath dress adorned with sequins, looking stunning. I was dressed in a sport coat, black pants, and a ribbed t-shirt under the coat. As she entered, she playfully commented on my attire, suggesting that I was attempting to seduce her. I clarified that it was strictly business that evening, reserving any such intentions for another time. She expressed regret at the missed opportunity, mentioning that she was wearing a thong, believing it would be to my liking. Playfully, I asked her to show me, drawing her closer, my hands on the hem of her dress. I teasingly lifted it up her legs toward her enticing figure. She warned about Amanda potentially entering at any moment, but I insisted, emphasizing the need for Amanda to think I was participating in her game. We shared a moment of laughter as I continued the playful interaction. As I was about to appreciate the delightful view in front of me, Amanda entered the room unexpectedly. There was a moment of surprise, and Sebra quickly adjusted her dress. Amanda greeted us with a smile, commenting on the apparent early start to our evening. I responded with a playful suggestion that she and Bill should be the ones getting a room. Amanda smirked at us, picked up her clutch, and we headed out for the night. Bill met us at the club. I don't think the evening started the way he'd expected. I shook his hand and just crushed it. I've been powerlifting for years, and one thing it does if you lift without straps is it gives you quite a grip. I could see him start to go weak in the knees, and I let him go. You could tell he wanted to whimper and nurse his hand, but his macho image wouldn't let him. He was one of those pretty boys. Have you ever noticed that as men approach what some women would call ideal, the likelihood of there being a hairdresser or a Scientologist goes up to near infinity? Observing Bill, I drew a parallel with Tom Cruise. Curious, I inquired if he was a hairdresser, to which he chuckled and dismissed the idea, stating that hairdressers are predominantly gay. Acknowledging this, I brought up L. Ron Hubbard and revealed my affiliation with Scientology for 6 years, explaining that I was testing a theory. Zebra, having heard my theory before, was on the verge of choking and seemed ready to burst into laughter. Glancing at Amanda, who was visibly red with anger, I realized I might have shared too many private theories with Zebra. Deciding to change the subject, Zebra suggested finding a booth and marched away with a tense posture, with Mr. Bill trailing behind her at a safe distance. Once he was out of earshot, Zebra erupted into laughter, and I joined in. Acknowledging, "You're a mean man, Corwin," she said. "Yeah, well, this is a hell of a night," I responded, encouraging her to pull herself together and act like she was seducing me. Zebra played her part convincingly. By the time we reached the booth, I found myself thoroughly seduced. After dancing with her twice, she exhibited everything but engaging in a closeness act right on the dance floor. Amanda was occupied with Mr. Bill. During our return, I asked Zebra, "Are you ready for the big show?" She gazed up at me with those upturned eyes, an expression in them that conveyed this wasn't merely a game for her. They were enormous and radiant brown, and I found myself falling into their depths. I observed those full, lush lips slightly part, and her petite, pointed tongue moistened them. I couldn't resist. I had to taste her. It exceeded all my expectations and more. Suddenly, I heard a noise, and Amanda and Mr. Bill were sliding back into the booth. "Oh no," I exclaimed in my best Saturday Night Live voice impression. "Look who's back." Zebra caught on, and so did Amanda, but Mr. Bill remained oblivious. Zebra chuckled, advising against doing anything mean to him. Amanda's face changed, puffing up like a pufferfish, and the smug smirk disappeared. I informed them that Zebra and I were planning to leave. I suggested they have fun, and Amanda escorted us to the door. She inquired about my well-being, noting that I had been acting like an idiot earlier. I responded that I was not okay and urged Mandy to consider leaving now with me. I proposed going home and trying to work things out. I warned that if she stayed, it would be a permanent decision. She expressed her excitement, mentioning that this would be great for us, and advised me to go and enjoy myself, assuring it would be awesome. She encouraged me to avoid being an idiot. I retorted, implying her interest in Mr. Bill, not me, and stated that we were leaving. She grabbed my arm, insisting it would be a great experience, emphasizing that Zebra was interested in me. I questioned if she was spending the night with him, teasing about his stamina. She hesitated a bit, mentioning she might get home around midnight, planning to spice things up with Mr. Bill. I slapped myself on the forehead, remembering their plans. I told her to be quiet if Zebra and I were still engaged when she returned. She kissed me, and I hope she enjoyed it, knowing it would be the last one. I left and got into the car, where Zebra was waiting. She asked if I was sure about my decision, considering my long marriage. I sighed and affirmed that I was sure. She commented on my seemingly calm demeanor. Expressing surprise at my lack of distress, I explained that I had run out of emotional energy, having been upset for an extended period. I clarified that I was now just tired and sick, wanting the ordeal to be over. I mentioned that I had shed countless tears, but that time had passed, and it was now time to move on. I suggested going to get the girls. Upon arriving, we noticed the moving truck already being loaded. The girls were busy carrying their clothes downstairs and packing them in large plastic tubs. As for furniture, we were only taking essential items such as the bed from the master suite, the girls' beds, their TVs and electronics, and the big screen we had replaced 6 months ago with an even larger one. When the girls completed their packing, Zebra took them in her car, and they drove to our new place. It was as far from the old one as we could get while still remaining in the same school district. The guys finished packing, and I took a final look around. It appeared empty and silent, with only the ghosts of 19 years lingering. With a sigh, I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the kitchen table, alongside my cell phone. The girls' phones were already there, signaling it was time to leave. A sense of melancholy surrounded me. I was departing with a whimper, a few petty jabs at Amanda and Mr. Bill, and I was walking away from 19 years that had been pretty damn good. Oh well, stuff happens. I locked up, loaded my tools from the garage into the back of my truck, and departed. The girls were quite excited about the new place, especially with its backyard pool. They couldn't wait to try it out the next day. "Do you like that, baby?" I asked Audra. "Yeet," she said. I had no idea what yeet meant, but it sounded positive. Zebra was present, still looking amazing. However, even if she had been Jennifer Lawrence in the flesh, I was just tired. Not that I'd prefer Jennifer Lawrence to Zebra, but you know what I mean. I think she sensed that and gave me a dazzling smile, a quick peck on the cheek, and then she was gone. The lingering scent of her perfume was the only reminder that she had been there. We went to bed, and surprisingly, I slept. Not well, but I did sleep. The next morning I got up and made coffee, and the girls joined me. After a while, we had a Danish Kringle and chocolate milk for breakfast, and they watched cartoons on TV until noon. Two gorgeous little bikini-clad bundles of energy were then splashing in the pool while I lounged and observed. I wasn't really paying attention, wondering what Mandy was doing. By now, she'd likely be frantic, calling everyone she could think of, trying to figure out what had happened. She was going to have a tough time finding us. I wasn't working. I had sold the business and made out well. The girls weren't in school, it was summer vacation. We weren't going anywhere except to the grocery store, and we walked or took a bus there. The truck was parked in the garage. I was sure she had the police looking for us, but not having a car would be problematic for them. The only way she could reach us was electronically. She flooded our inboxes with messages, immediately messaged the girls whenever they signed onto social media, and sent tweets and messages on Instagram. We read them but didn't respond. Let her find us the hard way. I anticipated that she would eventually look for me, considering she had work and bills to pay. I, on the other hand, wasn't making any payments, and I knew she would quickly fall behind. We had significant equity in the house, and losing it wouldn't be something she'd desire. About 3 weeks later, a private detective approached me in the grocery store. He inquired about my identity, to which I responded that my wife had hired him to find me. He declared his intention to inform her of my whereabouts and suggested I give her a call. Threateningly, he warned of charging me with stalking if he saw me around. Dismissing him, I told him to smack it, expressing no intention of reaching out to her. It turned out I didn't have to. The police showed up, and Mandy had fed them a line that I had kidnapped the girls. They requested me to go down to the station and sort it out. When I declined, they arrested me and took me downtown. The girls went in another car, and upon reaching the station, Amanda was there. She attempted to hug the girls, but they rejected her. They pushed her away, and a woman came to get them. Along with Amanda, they went into one room and I into another. The cops began questioning me aggressively. I provided my identification, noting that they already had my driver's license. The only words I uttered were a declaration of my intention to remain silent and my request to speak to an attorney. This statement silenced them, and I overheard one of them mentioning that I was lawyering up. They handed me a phone, and I called John Trimble, who arrived in 45 minutes as we had planned. It took approximately 3 hours to resolve everything. During the process, the girls affirmed that they were with me willingly and denied any kidnapping. They refused to speak to their mother. John took over from there, pointing out the absence of a court order on custody. He emphasized that under Georgia law, both parents were considered equal candidates for custody, and highlighted that children over 14 could choose the parent with whom they wanted to live. Ultimately, they had no choice but to let us go. Sebra walked out with us, and Amanda trailed behind, pleading with the girls to talk to her. They got in Sebra's car and drove away, leaving us alone in the parking lot. Amanda was crying buckets, appearing like a mess. She turned those forlorn eyes toward me and fell to her knees. I reminded her that I had previously begged her not to mess around with Mr. Bill, stating that she hadn't listened, so why should I? She continued pleading, asking me not to treat her this way and expressing sorrow. I agreed to talk, asking her where she wanted to go. She pleaded to go home, not wanting anyone to see her. Like this. I suggested going to my home as I had no interest in going to hers and didn't know who she had been involved with there. She gave a little wail of dismay but nodded her head, agreeing to go to my home. She said, "Okay, Corwin, whatever you want, but it's your home too." I didn't argue with her. She suggested that I ride with her, but I declined, opting to call a cab instead. She followed me home, knowing the girls were with Sebra, and spending the night. I welcomed Amanda in and got her a cup of coffee. We sat at the bar, and an uncomfortable silence lingered. Silence hadn't been uncomfortable between us since our third date, but it sure was now. After a while, she asked what I wanted, and I countered by asking if I had mentioned wanting anything. She clarified, asking what she needed to do to get me to come home and see the girls. I responded that I had no control over her seeing the girls, it was their choice. She accused me of poisoning the girls against her and suggested Marcy might have told me about it. I inquired if Marcy was the oracle of all wisdom. She repeated her question, asking what I wanted. I noted that the funny thing was I hadn't said a word to the girls about her. The only thing I had told them was that I was leaving, and they needed to decide who they wanted to live with. When she pressed on, wondering who had told them, I revealed that she was the one who had told them. Confused, she asked when she would have said anything. I reminded her of the night in the living room when she threatened me, and I pointed out that the girls were sitting on the stairs overhearing every word she said. Her face went pale, and she started sobbing, unable to continue. I conveyed to her that the girls believed she had poisoned their perception, and I added that I also shared that belief. Her pleading was pitiful, reminiscent of my own. I responded callously, expressing indifference toward the situation with the girls, stating that she had messed it up and needed to fix it. When she asked what could be done with me, I suggested she file for divorce. She insisted that she didn't want a divorce, she just wanted me to come home. I asserted that I considered myself already at home, clarifying that I didn't live with her. She apologized, admitting it was a mistake to force me into the situation and expressing regret. She pleaded for forgiveness, proposing to go to a marriage counselor or a therapist. In response, I explained that the problem wasn't that I didn't want it, but that she did. I demanded that she file for divorce and warned her that if she didn't do so within a few months, I would take the initiative. I made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with her, considering our relationship irreparable. Angry, she called me a fool, accusing me of taking all our money by selling the business and emptying our bank accounts. I defended my actions, stating that I had sold the business at a significant loss and had taken only the money I had earned. I emphasized that I didn't have a dime of it left. All of that was indeed accurate. I had securely stashed the money away in an offshore account, realizing it was crucial to do so before the divorce proceedings began. The records indicated that I sold the business to a Danish company for an amount less than what I owed in taxes. I had intentionally overpaid the IRS significantly, with the surplus funds held to offset future tax liabilities. Our brokerage accounts remained untouched, although I recognized that I would have to relinquish half of them to secure the girls' financial future. I had initiated a trust for them, ensuring they would be financially comfortable for the next 3 months. As part of my strategy, I had been frequenting various grocery stores, Walmarts, and convenience stores in town. Using my debit card, I made a point to request cash back every time the machine prompted me to do so. I had been obtaining cash ranging between $160 and $200 from numerous stores in town, with 3 people involved in each transaction. This strategy had the potential to accumulate a significant amount quickly. The transactions were legitimate, and I had a substantial stack of cash stored in an old chest in a storage building, ready for use once the coast was clear. Addressing Amanda, I informed her that she could have the house. The equity built up in it was sufficient for her to sell, get out of the mortgage, and manage for a while. I suggested that after selling the house, she might consider moving in with Mr. Bill, wondering aloud about his wife's reaction to that prospect. Amanda gasped, claiming ignorance of his marital status. I pointed out that her desire for an open marriage indicated a lack of concern about his marital status and advised her to move on, urging her to file for divorce. Standing up and heading toward the door, I was followed by Amanda, who was visibly upset, wringing her hands and crying. She stopped at the door, looked up at me, and requested that I tell the girls that she loved them and apologized. I agreed to convey the message and asserted that I wasn't giving up. I clarified that I wasn't filing for divorce because I didn't want one, expressing my desire for her to come back home. She commented on my apparent lack of open-mindedness and expressed regret that she hadn't anticipated the situation turning out this way. She continued professing her love for me and declared her intention to keep trying. I was too tired to argue with her. I saw her out the door, took a minute to collect myself, and called Zebra. She brought the girls home, but she didn't come in. Audra and Olivia were very upset and even angrier with their mother than before, if that was possible. I knew they wouldn't be at all receptive to the message from Amanda I had for them, so I decided to just sit on it for a while. 2 days later, Amanda showed up at about 4:30 with dinner. She'd made chicken tetrazzini with French-cut green beans and a big basket of garlic bread. Olivia opened the door. Amanda tried to hug her and got a stiff arm for her troubles. Amanda greeted me, addressing me as baby, and Olivia called out for my attention. I heard Amanda expressing her apologies, professing love, and stating that she missed me. However, Olivia abruptly shut her down, refusing to hear any of it and instructing her to stay away. Amanda was visibly shaken, and as she nearly collapsed, I rescued the basket of food she was carrying. Taking her to the sofa, she sat down and buried her face in her hands, sobbing about how much she was hated. I acknowledged that what she did to the girls was hurtful and expressed doubt that they would trust her again. Despite sympathizing with her pain, I emphasized that rebuilding any relationship with the girls would be her responsibility, not theirs or mine. She mentioned making dinner and looked at me pleadingly. Despite recognizing that she brought it upon herself, I decided to help. I offered to talk to the girls while she found the dishes in the kitchen upstairs. The girls were furious, expressing disbelief at Amanda showing up and thinking that feeding them would make everything okay. Audra voiced her anger, stating that Amanda had destroyed their family. I empathized with Audra, explaining that Amanda had thrown in the hand grenade and now had to deal with the consequences. Despite Amanda's misguided perception that I was the problem, I reassured the girls that my love for them remained unchanged. I gave them the option to stay with me or be with their mother, emphasizing that my love for them would never waver. Olivia expressed her strong aversion to eating with her mother, stating that she'd rather hang herself. The girls affirmed their decision to stay with me, and we shared a hug. I proposed the idea of going down to eat with their mother and trying to be civil. Olivia asked if I wanted them to, and I expressed my desire for them to do so while avoiding mean comments. They agreed to be civil but intended to convey their feelings. The dinner turned out to be extremely awkward. Amanda tried to engage the girls in conversation, but they responded with curt replies. After the meal, we cleaned up, packed Amanda's dishes, and she prepared to leave. When Amanda asked Audra for a hug, Audra declined, stating that Amanda was no longer her mother. Both girls went to their rooms without saying another word. Amanda was visibly distraught, and it took her about 30 minutes to compose herself enough to leave. Despite feeling pity for her, I took no responsibility for the situation. I found satisfaction in the turn of events, enjoying every minute of it. She continued to come over about once a week, and the girls kept destroying her hopes. She didn't file for divorce and continued to try to talk me into moving back in with her. After 6 months, I filed. When the divorce was final, I think Amanda finally realized that we were through. The court gave her visitation rights, and somehow, every time she wanted to visit, there was something that did not let the visit happen. I certainly hope she found someone that suited her open life. I sure had. I am still unmarried, my life dedicated only to my girls. My cheating wife panicked when I showed up instead of her affair partner, unveiling her double life. My friend, Frank, was picking me up for a 4-day hunting trip, so I said goodbye to my wife. Frank packed his truck with all his hunting gear. Preparation was essential for success. He uncovered the truck bed and opened a drawer behind the cab. "Put your rifle here," he said, pointing to the box. I placed my rifle in the gear inside. I got into the cab and glanced back at the house. The door was closed. Frank drove to an old family cabin now managed by his Uncle Bob, who couldn't get around anymore, so Frank took care of it. "He's made major improvements," Frank said, "like better insulation and a more efficient wood stove, so we won't need parkas all the time this season." He added a satellite dish for TV and internet. Frank continued, "There's no reliable cell coverage, but you can use WhatsApp over Wi-Fi if you want to call Maeve. She doesn't expect a lot of contact." I replied, "And I like being out of touch, so I won't mention the internet." We watched SportsCenter during dinner. Later, I read a John Sanford novel while Frank used his laptop. We were sipping our second beers of the evening. We weren't just out for a drunken boys' trip. We wanted to test ourselves against nature and hopefully get some venison. "Oh crap," Frank suddenly exclaimed. I closed my book, looking at him. Frank's eyes were glued to the screen as he scrolled. "Holy double crap," he said, then looked at me with doubt on his face. I bookmarked my page. "What's up?" Frank, was he reading the news? Did something happen to Maeve? His voice dropped. "Oh crap, you need to see this." He turned the laptop toward me. I got up, crossed the room, and sat down. I expected a terrible headline, but it wasn't a news site. It was a social network. On the screen was a picture of Maeve smiling. I always thought her smile looked evil. I looked at Frank. "What the hell is this?" "Sorry, Matt, it's a dating site," he replied helplessly. "A dating site?" I couldn't believe it. After Tracy and I broke up, I was in a bad place for months. I did nothing. Eventually, I started using Tinder and other sites to meet women. I stared at him. Some of these sites skip dating and go straight to hookups. Frank lightened up. I did get lucky a few times, but there are wives on there too. Wives? Yes, some wives and many husbands looking for fun on the side. I looked back at the screen. Another picture of my wife appeared. My gut clenched. Look, Matt, I've seen a lot of fake profiles. They use women's names and images without their knowledge. Maeve might be a sufferer. I've never seen her on these sites before. I hoped that was true. As I examined the profile, the photos were definitely of Maeve. Had they been hacked? One detail stabbed me in the heart, the outfit in one photo. I bought it for her last Christmas. The picture was less than a year old and I didn't take it. I started reading, "Can you help me with my daddy issues?" And I don't mean sugar daddy. I think my dad has always want to, but he hasn't yet. I think about what it would be like sometimes. I imagine my dad now, middle-aged but still hot. Sometimes I picture him young. I even imagine a viral, retired man. Daddy's girl would be happy to help, so if you're clean and fit the description, please send a photo. I'm alone for the long weekend and would love some engaging daddy-daughter time. Below the profile was a box reading, current status closing soon. I looked at Frank. Daddy issues? What the hell? Maybe this is good, Frank said quickly, seeing my reaction. Some cheating wives aren't unhappy with their husbands. They just have fantasies they're uncomfortable sharing. And maybe it's about trying something new, or they have daddy fantasies. Frank shrugged. I read further, feeling a lump in my throat. Frank said, "You found double crap indeed. Dad's family is from Greece and Italy, so he has a classic Mediterranean look. Dark eyes, dark curly hair, a strong nose with a slight Roman hump. If that's you, I'm looking forward to a daddy-daughter date. If you're 6 feet 5 inches tall with the build of a long-distance runner, it'll be a hot date." What? What? Frank responded. I thought you knew, but clearly you didn't. Not a clue, man, not a clue. We were both confused. Ma's father, Sean, is a pale-skinned Irishman with rust-brown hair. The description fit me, not him. Then I reached the triple crap. Under Ma's profile was a box that said, "Join the chat room." I scrolled through the messages and saw one that struck me. "Hi, I've had a lot of free time this month. Do you have a place for me?" Maeve replied, "Oh yes, I can make room. Let me know when I can see you again. Did you have a good time last month?" "Screw me," I said, stunned. "She's been doing this for a while." I looked at Frank. "Can you tell how long she's been on this site? Maybe she's doing it for money?" I recoiled, half expecting to see Maeve on a live feed. Frank took the last step and navigated the site. As far as I know, it's just a dating site. It's not set up like she's running a business. It looks like she's doing this for fun, he continued. She thought once would be enough. I growled. If it really was only once, she's having a whole weekend while I'm away. Whoa, Matt. It's a pop-up site for speed dating, not long-term relationships. Make a date with her, I said. What? Swipe right or whatever and see if she's available this weekend. I want to know if she's really having fun while I'm up here. I could try, he said reluctantly, but I don't fit the description. She wants to see a picture. It hit me. She wants a picture of me. I told Frank my idea to set her up using my picture. He thought it was a good idea. I reminded him it was too late. I could still ruin her fun by writing in the chat room that I'm coming home with a rifle. Frank said it was best not to warn her. She said she's free Friday and Sunday, so she'll make a date for then. Frank and I had taken Friday and Monday off to maximize our hunting time, so I wasn't expected home until Monday afternoon. If you text her now, she'll have time to get her lies together. His voice tinged with anger, and I remembered his wife Tracy had left him for her boss. If we go now, you'll catch her in person with proof. He grinned as he looked at Ma's profile. It was a little over 3 hours home. We discussed our options, preparing May for our arrival, following her to her dates, and catching her daddy. The most serious topic was the inevitable divorce. Frank's experience with divorce law was painful, but it would help me. 2 hours later, we were on our third repeat of plans, driving mostly in silence. We pulled onto my street around 10:45. Frank slowing down in front of my house. I told Frank, "Keep going." He glared but pressed the gas. "Turn the corner and stop," I commanded. He did, then looked at me again. There's a car parked across from our house. I don't recognize it. No one parks on the street here at night. She's already started, and she's doing it in our house. I reached for the door. "Thanks, buddy. You can leave." "Screw it, man. We have a plan. We either check it out together or we leave and deal with it tomorrow." "No, I need to know now," I insisted. "Come on, Matt. If she's alone, it won't prove anything, and you'll still be messed up." "I need to know," I repeated. "Okay, plan B," he said, driving to the alley behind my house. Frank spoke forcefully. "Whether she's alone or not, we look around then go to my place. My divorce taught me to think hard before reacting," he added, figuratively speaking, remembering my rifle in the truck. Of course, I thought. Frank parked, and we walked silently towards my house, staying in the shadows. I lifted the alley gate lever, hoping Ma forgot to lock it after taking out the trash. She had. We slipped inside. Our bedroom was in the back corner of the house. We saw a faint light behind the curtains. Moving quietly to avoid the leaves, we reached the larger window. I tried to peek inside, but the curtain blocked the view. Frank shook his head. I moved closer, and saw a gap in the curtain. Peeking through, I saw Maeve and an older man on the bed. I almost smashed the window, but remembered my Leatherman tool. I reached for it, but felt Frank's hand stopping me. He signaled for silence and pulled me away. I resisted, but eventually fell back. Frank threw his hands up, walked to the gate, and I followed. We walked to his truck. I glanced at the lockbox under the vinyl upholstery, knowing it held rifles, a .357 Magnum, and bear spray. Frank ignored my plea and said, "We've been here too long." He started the engine and drove out of the alley. He pulled into an empty grocery store parking lot a few blocks away. The store had closed, and only employees' cars were there. "Why don't I go in there and kick some rear?" I asked, needing Frank's logical voice again. "Because you'd end up in jail," he said. "It's not his fault." Ma invited him. "He probably doesn't even know she's married. I need to proceed cold and cautiously if I want to get out of this marriage to my best advantage," I repeated, echoing Frank's advice. Back at Frank's apartment, he locked all the weapons and bear spray in his weapon cabinet, forbidding me from touching them while I was still in shock. We sat at the kitchen counter, and Frank poured us tequila shots, silently toasting to the messed up world. We followed with Pacifico beers. "She's cheating on you with you," Frank said, pondering the situation. "Maybe she's trying to rekindle the spark from when you first met. I wasn't 55 then, and our bed hasn't gone cold. Maybe she loves you and only wants more of you. Maybe daddy is how she explains it." I shook my head, dismissing the idea. Frank continued, suggesting opening up the relationship to control the situation. I gave him a look that said, "Not happening," and asked for another pour. We overslept Friday morning but resumed our plans. Frank drove me to a car rental agency where I got an unassuming sedan. Then I went to a bank Mave and I didn't use and opened a checking account with money from our trip. I transferred half of our savings and 20% of our checking to the new account. The banker, Jim, reminded me to leave enough money in our joint account for mortgage, car loans, and credit card payments to protect my credit. He helped me set up the bank's app on my phone. Next, I went to a T-Mobile store and bought a dual SIM phone with a top-of-the-line camera. I didn't change our family account to avoid alerting Maeve. Frank convinced me to use our time until Monday to my advantage despite wanting to confront her immediately. "Sir, is everything okay?" I blinked and realized I was still at the T-Mobile table. The employee was explaining how to switch between SIM cards and I had been lost in dark thoughts. "Sorry," I said. "I banged my knee yesterday and it's causing sharp pain." "Oh, that doesn't sound good," she said skeptically. "I hope you feel better soon." She continued her explanation, and I left the store limping. Frank and I met at Starbucks and discussed the next phase of our plan over coffee. We then headed back to my neighborhood. We left Frank's noticeable truck in the same supermarket lot as last night, now filled with cars. Frank drove us in my rental to my house. This time my car was in the garage, but Ma's car and the red Hyundai Accent were gone. We reached the alley and I jumped out and entered through the back gate, which Maeve still hadn't locked. I thought about reminding her to lock it, but then I realized I was lucky she didn't. Entering through the front door might alert neighbors, so I stuck to the plan. Frank took up his position in the supermarket parking lot. We usually got home via Tompkins Parkway and 3rd Street, keeping an eye on the house. I felt a bit paranoid since Ma was supposed to be at work, but caution was key. I unlocked the back door and entered the utility room. Using a pole, I lowered the attic ladder. As I poked my head through the hatch, the walkie-talkie on my belt beeped twice. Frank's signal that he was in position. He would beep every 10 minutes as a countdown. I jammed the transmit button briefly to confirm our connection. Attic was too generous a term for the cramped storage space under the eaves. I had to crouch to move around. Luckily, the luggage I needed was just a few feet from the trapdoor. I grabbed a canvas gear bag and an old backpack-style briefcase. I avoided taking my preferred bags from downstairs to leave as little trace as possible. I closed up the attic, checking for any prints or marks. Next, I went to the alcove in the living room we used as a home office. I took my passport, social security card, will, birth certificate, and marriage license from the small safe, placing them in the briefcase. There was also $2,000 in cash. I took half. The safe also held gold coins worth about $5,000, but I only took the purchase receipt to avoid raising suspicion. Frank's double beep signaled I'd been inside for 10 minutes. I moved to the bedroom and grabbed black slacks, 2 dress shirts, 2 ties, dress socks, and black loafers, just enough for Maeve not to notice. The hard part was setting up surveillance. At Starbucks, Frank and I had figured out the new phone's time-lapse function. We didn't need sound. Visuals were enough. I hid the phone on a cabinet, peering between my hats, ensuring it captured 80% of the bed. I also adjusted the curtains for better peeking next time, despite Frank's advice against it. Another 10-minute warning from Frank came just as I finished. I moved to the living room. We had taken a trail camera from the cabin. I mounted it on a tall bookshelf to cover the sitting area. It had a motion sensor, a charged battery, and an empty SD card for the 3-day weekend. The bedroom phone would upload photos to my cloud every 6 hours. I left the house with 2 minutes to spare and received Frank's last signal. I joined him in the parking lot, keeping an eye on the corner of 3rd Street and Tompkins Parkway. Next, we went through the KFC drive-thru and sat at Frank's table with food and papers scattered around. We each had notebooks with to-do lists resembling a hostile takeover planning session. I wasn't hungry, but nibbled on chicken tenders and fries, more interested in the Jack Daniels Frank added to my cola. Okay, you should text her, Frank said. Gotta keep things normal. Maeve knew the cell signal in the mountains was bad and relied on it to avoid awkward calls from me. Our standard practice was to send a text just in case I found a signal while hiking, and managed to send the message. I stared at the screen. What do I say? Give me that, Frank said, taking the phone. Just say what you always do. He scrolled through our past texts. Here we go, the usual, he read aloud as he typed. Hey babe, we got here without any problems. The weather seems good. We'll be out on the trail early in the morning. I'll text again later. XOXO, Matt. He hit send and then started dialing another number. Next call is to the lawyer, Frank said. Kelly DeWitt had helped him in his divorce and would be good for me too. He introduced me to her, then handed me the phone. Hello, Matt, a pleasant voice said. Frank didn't tell me your last name, Karras, but call me Matt, I said. Okay, Matt, I understand this happened unexpectedly and pretty ugly, she said. Yeah, pretty damn ugly, excuse my language, I replied. She laughed. Don't worry, if you can't vent to your lawyer, who can you vent to, she said. I relaxed a bit. So, are you my lawyer? Do I need one? I asked. Let's start with the second question. This is about infidelity, right? Are you willing to forgive it and try counseling? She inquired. Hell no, I responded. Good. Are you willing to use the court's online system to file on your own? She asked. That's for no-fault cases, right? I can't file for infidelity there, I replied. Correct. If you want infidelity to affect alimony and such, you need an attorney, she explained. Can you represent me? Frank says you did right by him, I said. Did he tell you the cost? She asked. He did, I confirmed. Our prices have gone up a bit, but I'll charge you the same as Frank. Sound fair? She proposed. Yes. When can we meet? I asked. I can fit you in Monday morning, she offered. I covered the phone and whispered to Frank. She wants to start right away because the case is interesting. He grinned. I told you. Miss DeWitt, that works for me. Should I bring my proof? I asked. Do you already have proof? I take it you just discovered the deception, she queried. Yes. We took screenshots of her profile and saw her with a guy last night. I also installed a camera in my bedroom to catch any other activity over the weekend, I explained. So she advertised online for partners? Interesting, she noted. And she was looking for guys who look like me, I added. Just to clarify, haven't you gained a lot of weight since you got married? She asked. No, I replied. I'm 6 feet 0 inches tall and 185, 5 pounds heavier than when we married. I lift weights and run regularly. Good to know. We'll talk more on Monday, she said. Good, that's good to hear. Okay, Matt, after we hang up, I'll open a secure data transfer site and send you the login code. Frank knows the portal address. Send me any evidence you have, and I'll review it before our meeting at 11 on Monday, she instructed. 11:000 Monday? Yes, I'll see you then, I confirmed. And Matt, she added. Yes, I responded. Avoid your wife until we meet, or don't return home. I only practice family law, not criminal law, she advised. Okay, I paused. Okay. After getting the secure code from the lawyer and sending her screenshots of Ma's profile, Frank checked my phone. My wife responded quickly, miss you, but hope you're having fun. Happy hunting. Love you, Maeve. Frank typed a message to Maeve, saying we hadn't gotten a deer yet and were about to crash for the night. He then put the phone in his safe, explaining it would act like a Faraday cage. I'll press send, but the signal will be blocked, then I'll turn off the power. When you turn it back on later, it'll look like the message was delayed by a bad signal. You read too many spy novels, I said, but I was grateful. Frank then shared his divorce experience, detailing how he had to cover the mortgage and pay spousal support for his ex-wife, even though she was still seeing another man. I hoped Ma's infidelity would spare me from such a fate. We applied Frank's knowledge. I closed investment accounts and changed the passwords for all of Ma's logins. I updated contact info on all accounts to my new phone and email. I canceled joint credit cards except for the one Ma used for daily expenses, which I lowered the limit on. As the 6-hour mark approached, it was time to check the first data dump to my cloud account. I nearly lost my KFC when I saw my wife's activities. I had programmed the phone to take 6 pictures every 30 seconds, every 15 minutes. The first set showed an empty bed, now made with different pillowcases. Out of picture sets, 6 were blank, and 5 showed her with 2 other lovers. I need to get out of here, I moaned, swallowing. Yeah, Frank agreed. Come on, I'll buy you a drink. No, I need to be alone, I said. I don't think that's a good idea, Matt, Frank said. Damn it, Frank, I need to throw up, I need to cry, I need to be alone, I insisted. I understand, but getting caught driving drunk or getting into trouble won't help, Frank advised. I assured him I'd avoid bars and home. Just get on the highway and drive, he suggested. He reluctantly agreed and sent pictures of every daddy to Kelly DT before I left. He reminded me to turn on my phone so Maeve would get my message, and he could check on me. I thanked him and headed out, promising to stay away from booze. I drove 30 minutes north and back to let night fully set in. The supermarket was still open, so I parked and walked to my house, entering the alley behind it. The back gate was locked, but I climbed over the fence. I crossed the yard quietly and peered through the gap in the curtains. Maeve was now in bed with someone. As I moved toward the back door, my phone beeped with a message and then a call from Frank. I dismissed it and continued. Suddenly, I heard, "I see you, idiot," from the darkness. It was Frank standing in the bed of his truck. "Get over here or I'll start honking," he warned. I crept to the fence, making more noise than I liked. I didn't want the neighbors calling. "What the hell?" I hissed. "She's in there with some toy soldier. I'm going to teach him some manners," Frank declared. "Get out of here or I'll call the police myself," I threatened. I climbed over the fence into his truck bed. We drove quietly away and stopped at a bar on Tompkins Parkway, 2 blocks from the supermarket. We sat in a back booth, and Frank made me drink a shot of Jim Beam and take a long sip of Bud before letting me talk. "I've had enough. She's turned my house into a strumpet house. I'll never sleep there again, but I'll be damned if I let this disrespect continue," I vented. "Okay then, let's stop it," Frank said, catching me off guard. "What?" I asked. "Give me your phone." He took it, went to my contacts, and called Maeve. He put it on speaker. After 5 rings, she picked up, gasping. "Matt, why are you? I mean, what a nice surprise. You must really miss me," Ma said. "Hi, Maeve, it's Frank," Frank responded. "Frank? Why are you calling? Is Matt okay?" she asked, concerned. "He's had a little accident. It's not too serious, but I might take him down the mountain tonight. Just wanted to let you know," Frank explained. "Oh my God, what happened? Can I talk to him?" May asked, panicking. "Calm down, it's not that bad. He fell and hit his head on a tree branch and is sleeping with an ice pack. If he acts weird, I'll take him to the hospital," Frank assured her. "Do I need to come?" she asked. "No, like I said." Frank ran his thumb over the microphone and dropped the phone under the table so there's no reception. "Frank, I didn't hear that last part," Maeve said, confused. Frank stroked the microphone once more. "Lie, 1 bar now, more later." Then he cut the call off. "Okay," Frank said. "We've stopped it." I laughed for the first time in 24 hours. After hanging up, I needed to know if the prank worked. Frank was sure Ma would throw out the soldier and cancel her dates if she thought I was hurt. As we walked from the bar to my house, Frank mentioned that Maeve likely made her visitors park outside the supermarket to avoid suspicion. "How considerate of her," I grinned. "Shh, I think that's him," Frank said. Ahead, a man in an army uniform was walking toward us. Frank positioned himself between us. "Good evening," Frank addressed the soldier, who grunted in response. Frank stopped and turned, making the soldier halt and face us. "He looks like you when you were younger," Frank said to me. The soldier furrowed his eyebrows, then his eyes widened as he looked between us. "Young daddy, meet your real husband," Frank said. "You like married women, don't you?" I growled. Frank took a step in front of me. "Down, boy," he said, clearly for the soldier to hear. "Didn't you notice any pictures that looked like an older brother when you were at that married woman's house?" Frank asked. Now I saw his anger. My buddy had been calm, but facing this situation, his own pain surfaced. She said she's divorced," the guy stammered. "Not yet, but soon," I growled. "Oh crap," he started to run. I knew I could catch him, but Frank stepped in front of me. "No, man, no." For the second time in 2 days, I almost pushed my best friend aside, but then I saw the misery on his face. "I lost Tracy to a cheater. I don't want to lose you too." I relaxed, but still wanted to go after the soldier. "You've already lost the main battle, kid. If you attack him, you'll win a small one but lose the war. It'll just make you look like a fool and could land you in jail." I slumped. "Maybe I'll punch him up later," I said. "In 6 months after we give you an alibi." Frank grinned. We sat in my rental car in the store parking lot. Maeve had kicked the soldier out, and Frank believed we had stopped her cheating. Frank was tired of my obsession but agreed to give me an hour. We spent half at the bar, sipping beers, then returned to the car. A Nissan Sentra with out-of-state plates pulled in, and a guy got out. He read the street signs under the street light. He looked like me, a cousin perhaps. He headed up 3rd Street, and I ran up 2nd, planning to circle back to my house. Frank followed him to prevent me from confronting him. I waited at the corner of Maple and 3rd. The guy checked the house number, then walked to our front door. I hid behind a tree, watching. He rang the doorbell, and Ma partially opened the door. I couldn't see her but heard her voice, too quiet to understand. The door closed after a few seconds, and he knocked loudly. Maeve opened it on the security chain and said, "I'm sorry, but it's off now. Please leave before I call the police." The door slammed, and I heard the deadbolt click. The guy stood there, realizing he had traveled far for nothing. What the hell? Hey, cow! He cut his run short when the porch light next door came on. As the door opened, he spun and walked quickly to the sidewalk. Curious retirees saved me from being seen. I stayed hidden while old Virgil Leonard looked out and saw the man walking away. Once it was clear, I hurried down 3rd Street, resisting the urge to knock on my front door. Frank waited for me around the corner of Elm, and we headed back to Tompkins. In the supermarket parking lot, we heard tires squealing as someone sped away. Anger and driving don't mix, Frank said. Very dangerous, I agreed. Saturday morning, after a restless sleep in Frank's guest room, I reviewed the camera footage from the night before. Maeve had been restless too. With nothing new, I prepared photos of Ma's encounters to send to my attorney. Should I include the video I took through the window? I asked Frank. Hell no, he replied. What you got from the other camera is enough. Let's not mention going into the house. Think that toy soldier freaked out? I asked, sending the pictures. Frank grinned. Probably. Then he frowned. I hope he stops showing off before he meets a husband with an unlocked weapon. Thanks for ruining my mood. Let's send Kelly her alarm call. That should cheer you up. Turning on my phone, I saw a dozen messages and missed calls from Maeve. I called her. Hey babe, it's Matt. Sorry Frank scared you. I'm fine now. I'll stay as planned and see you Monday night. Love you. I hit send and the phone rang. It was Kelly. Hey Kelly, didn't expect to hear from you on a Saturday morning. Hey Matt, I saw your new package on the website. I covered the microphone and asked Frank, should I tell her? He nodded. Kelly, I'm putting you on speaker so Frank can explain why Ma's night ended quietly. Good morning, Kelly, Frank said. Good morning, Frank. What have you been up to? Did I influence you badly with my barbs to Tracy? Frank explained the prank call and text messages but left out sneaking behind the house or confronting the soldier. I like that, she said when he finished. Are you sure she's canceled the other dates? Wait, she just responded to my last text, I said. Screw the deer, come home, I need you, I love you, please come home now. Told you, Frank said. Told him what? Kelly asked. That she really loves him despite all this. Kelly, have you encountered nymphomaniacs in your practice? People with serious mental disorders? She paused. I've had clients and spouses with mental health issues. It's possible, and I'm supposed to accept that. Forgive her if she claims it wasn't her fault? Kelly, you've seen the pictures. How do I stop seeing them whenever I look at her? I don't think you can, Kelly said. If she is diagnosed with a disorder, it will affect the divorce terms. But no judge will deny you a divorce after she planned all this. This conversation forced me to make a decision. Kelly, how quickly can you file the papers? I can't live with her anymore. I understand, she said. I'll have some options ready for us to discuss on Monday. We'll likely need to meet with her and her lawyer before deciding. Okay, but what do I tell her Monday night when I don't come home? You won't tell her anything. I'll handle that. So, what should I do now? I asked. I've reviewed your actions and you seem to have it covered. Anything more might backfire, so sit tight, be patient, and don't do anything rash. Frank grinned and said, I'm doing my best to keep him from that, but he keeps trying. By the way, Matt, didn't you say you were still good for Kay? Frank and I froze, wondering if Kelly was referring to my stamina. Yeah, I think I said something like that, I replied cautiously. Good, run along then. Bye, boys. She hung up. Ma called again, and I turned off my phone. Following Kelly's advice, I went to buy new running gear, as I hadn't brought any on the hunt. Frank joined me for a run, but we stopped at 3 miles beyond his comfort zone. I still felt restless, so Frank suggested another way to vent. We put the rifles back in his truck and headed to a shooting range an hour away to practice. I shot much more than Frank, so he finished cleaning his rifle first and talked to the range master. They glanced at me a few times. What did he say? I asked Frank on the way back. He asked if I could keep you from shooting anything but paper targets. I said I could. Frank moved my rifle to his weapons safe as soon as we returned to his apartment. The weekend was torturous, with Frank keeping me occupied. We watched Marvel movies, and he limited my whiskey, making sure I had non-alcoholic drinks in between. He managed my correspondence with Maeve, telling her I was doing well and still hunting. On Sunday, he texted her that I planned to spend the day in a tree stand. She's starting to call you an idiot for not coming home. Frank laughed. Wait until she gets served with divorce papers, I replied. A part of me enjoyed the payback, but mostly, I was miserable. I loved Ma and thought she loved me too. Maybe she had a mental breakdown. I wondered if I'd need therapy too. After a 4th sleepless night, I woke up Monday exhausted but resolute about the divorce. Maeve had planned too much and enjoyed it too much. We texted her that we were leaving again that morning and wouldn't be back until late. I apologized for scaring her on Friday and assured her I was fine. We did this from the supermarket parking lot near our house. Her response was quick. You let me suffer all weekend and still can't give up that deer to come back early. Maybe you should just go to Frank's place because I don't want to see you right away." I had to smile at the irony of her suggesting what I had been planning all along. 15 minutes later, I saw her car heading down 3rd Street and turning right onto Tompkins, her usual route to work. I parked in the alley behind our house, not trying to be completely undercover, but avoiding the front to prevent any neighborly curiosity. Once the coast was clear, I climbed the fence and entered through the back door. I retrieved my camera from the living room and my new cell phone from the bedroom. Then I grabbed a suitcase from the 2nd bedroom, which served as a pantry and closet but was supposed to be a nursery someday. That plan was now shattered, and my heart ached even more. I filled the suitcase with more clothes, gold coins from the safe, and my laptop. I figured she would hear the bad news from Kelly before realizing I had been in the house. Back at Frank's, I pulled the SD card from the camera and plugged it into the computer. Exhausted, I brushed my teeth and collapsed, fully dressed, onto the bed until Frank called to tell me the videotaping was over in the living room. Frank was making breakfast sandwiches in the microwave, and coffee was brewing. "Ah, the bachelor life. Check out the rest of the camera footage," he said. "It'll make you feel better." My laptop was on the coffee table with a shot of whiskey next to it. On a Monday morning, and I was already embracing the life of a divorced man. Why not? I downed the shot and braced myself to watch the footage. Frank was right. The video from Friday night to Monday morning was more entertaining and informative than expected. After the soldier left, we saw snippets of Maeve pacing the house, phone in hand, talking or texting, trying to check on me. This continued all night Saturday and Sunday. She looked increasingly irritated as I brushed off her concerns in favor of hunting. I noticed how Maeve cleaned up, putting back items in the living room that had been missing, mostly pictures of me. Frank sat next to me, eating sausage biscuits and drinking black coffee. "Damn," I said. "She really erased me, didn't she?" That guard wasn't lying when he said Ma filed for divorce. "Wait, go back," Frank said. "Go back to the end of Friday. What did you see?" I asked, rewinding to an earlier clip. "Look at her hands," he said. Ma was pacing the living room, texting with both hands. What then? I realized, oh no, rings. I skipped ahead to around 10:30 Saturday morning. Here they are. She played the role of divorcee to the last. Kelly DT, my attorney, greeted me when I arrived at her office. She was tall in a well-tailored suit with striking features. I focused on her dark amber eyes as she assessed me. 6 feet, 180, long-distance runner with some muscle. I guess I can believe the rest of your self-description, she said. Thankfully, she phrased it as a statement. Have a seat, Matt. I'm sure it's been a rough weekend. How are you? Kelly asked. It's been hard. Anything new from Maeve? I had sent her some of Ma's messages, including the one asking me not to come home. This just came in while I was parking. I handed her my phone. Baby, please ignore my last message. Yes, I'm mad, but I need you home. I'm dying here without you, please, Maddie, Kelly read aloud. Okay, Kelly said. It doesn't seem like your wife did this to get rid of you. I have a feeling once she knows you found out, she won't try it again. I can't pretend this didn't happen, I said. No, of course not. But if she explains and promises it won't happen again, could you forgive her? Kelly asked. Kelly raised her hand to stop my angry response. I have to ask about reconciliation, Matt. The judge will insist, and I get the feeling you still love her, she continued. I do, but I don't see how I can. You saw pictures and clips, but you didn't sit through it all, I said. Kelly didn't need to ask what I meant. She simply said, I understand, but as a family lawyer, I have to see if the family can be saved. Maeve will likely fight to keep you two together, but no, she can't force you into marriage counseling. I'm sure not in this case. Okay, tell me your plan, and let's work out the property and financial details. If you want to file quickly, I said. Since this is for infidelity, do I still have to give her half of everything and pay alimony, since my income is double hers? I asked. Kelly spent the morning answering these questions and more. By p.m., with deli sandwiches delivered, she had sketched out a plan to minimize the damage to my finances and position. It was time to pull the trigger, and I nodded to Kelly. She put my phone on speaker and called Maeve. The call was answered before the first ring ended. Maddie, where are you? Are you coming home? Are you okay? What the hell are you playing at, idiot? Oh God, baby, I need you. Where are you? Ma said frantically. Mrs. Karras, Kelly almost yelled to stop Ma's rant. What? Who is that? Oh my God, she screamed. Where's Matt? What happened to Matt? Mrs. Karras, my lawyer said louder. Using my phone to call Maeve wasn't the best plan, but we feared she'd ignore any other call. Mr. Karras, Matthias, is fine. He wasn't hurt at all. He's fine, Kelly assured her. But Frank said, Who are you and why are you calling on Matt's phone? Ma asked, confused. Mr. Karras gave me his phone to ensure you'd answer. I assure you, he's fine. Mr. Spinner's reports were a hoax. I apologize for the fear they caused, Kelly explained. Kelly stuck her tongue out at me. A prank? What's going on? Who are you and why are you calling my cell phone, Matt? Maeve demanded. Mrs. Karras, I'm using Mr. Karras's phone with his permission, and this call is being recorded. Do you mind? Kelly said as Ma's voice trailed off, still angry and puzzled. Why is it being recorded? Who are you? Ma asked. My name is Kelly DeWitt, an attorney with Green Family Law in Springville. Your husband, Matthias Karras, has hired me to represent him in the dissolution of your marriage, Kelly stated. The dissolution? Ma repeated, stunned. Yes, Mr. Karras wants the dissolution to be quick and private, Kelly confirmed. A sordid affair? I imagined Maeve stunned, able only to repeat Kelly's words. Yes, Mrs. Karras, normally we'd serve you with divorce papers, but Mr. Karras hopes to reach an agreement outside of court. Please contact your attorney as soon as possible, Kelly instructed. Attorney, Ma echoed. Yes. Do you have a pen and paper? I'll give you my contact information, Kelly offered. No, I don't, Ma replied. I'll send you a message with my contact information. After that, the phone will stop working and you won't be able to contact Mr. Karras through it, Kelly explained. But I need to talk to Matt. This is all wrong. We love each other. Is he there? I need to talk to him, Ma pleaded. I'm sorry, Mrs. Karras, but Mr. Karras isn't ready to talk. Have your lawyer contact me. Goodbye, Kelly said firmly. Kelly hung up as Maeve began to speak. That went well, Kelly said, sending a text with her office information to Ma's phone before disconnecting it. Her words were sarcastic but sounded sad. Are you okay? I asked, feeling the odd role reversal. I like protecting spouses from misuse, but cases like this make me sad and tired. There's something strange going on here, Matt. I think you're doing the right thing, but I don't sense vindictiveness from your wife. For whatever reason, maybe an uncontrollable dependence, she's blown up her life, and neither of you will be happy. Screw me, I'm not even. Have I already seen the last happy day of my life? Kelly shook her head vigorously. No, it sucks now, but it's not the end. We'll connect you with a therapist. If you take counseling seriously, you'll recover faster. Frank waited too long for counseling, and it cost him unnecessary pain. Don't make the same mistake. Yeah, it cost me, Frank confirmed a few hours later as we ate chicken wings, shrimp, and Bloody Marys at a downtown sports bar. I thought therapy was just psychological nonsense, but I ended up wallowing in my own mess like a clogged toilet. You talked to me for a while, and you could have talked more, I said, trying to ignore his metaphor. I know you had my back, but seeing you and Maeve so happy hurt more than it helped, at least until I got outside counseling. But why? I asked. Because you and Maeve seemed perfect, and it made me grieve for what I'd lost. Realizing I'd been living a lie for so long hurt even more. I sipped my drink, unsure of what to say. After seeing Kelly's therapist, I could finally see you two as a sign of hope instead of a reminder of my past, and now it's all turned out to be another lie, I said. Screw me, he muttered. Screw me, I repeated, raising my glass for a toast. We clinked quietly and drank deeply. Hey, Matt, have a seat, Kelly DeWitt said, this time in a small conference room with papers spread out on a table. It was Tuesday afternoon, and I'd taken the day off. After updating my work information on Monday, I spent most of the day at Frank's, searching for a new apartment since I couldn't live in my ruined house. I ran 5 miles in the morning and another 3 before meeting Kelly, hoping the endorphins would help me stay calm. Kelly had talked to Maeve that morning, and she said I needed to hear what Ma had to say in person. When the receptionist led me to the conference room, I half expected to see Maeve and her lawyer waiting. Kelly laughed lightly, waving me into the empty room. No, just us. We needed space to work. As I sat down, she added, Ma wanted to be here to explain, but if this were a TV show, it would be a classic showdown. Glad it's not television, I said. Kelly gave me a wicked grin as I thought about our meeting the day before. I realized I was glad she wasn't like Ma at all. I think you'd be surprised, Kelly said, but it would be better if you heard it from Maeve. Stop escalating the situation, I said. Hear what? That she did it all for you? Kelly replied. I'm sure she got more than she expected, I said, shocked. What the hell? I barely stopped the profanity. The smirk disappeared from Kelly's face, and she placed her hand on mine as they clenched into fists on the table. She claimed I was some kind of willing betrayed man, I added. My voice rose, and I started to stand, but Kelly grabbed my wrist. No, oh God, Matt, no. I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd take it that way. I'm really sorry, Kelly said, trying to calm me. I relaxed slightly and stared at her. Ma didn't say that. She's very upset. That you found out and left her. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yes, I admitted. Then what did you mean by she did it all for me, I asked. The baby, Kelly said quietly. It hit me. We'd been trying to have a baby for 11 months. She found someone like me to get her pregnant since I hadn't succeeded yet. She wanted a baby desperately, and I hadn't realized she was willing to go to such extreme measures. She was doing this to get pregnant? I asked, seeking confirmation. Yes, Kelly replied, pushing some pages toward me. It was a lab report from 3 months ago, ordered by my gynecologist. It took me a moment to realize that Dr. Wellborn had provided 2 samples from patient 25,473, both with low counts. Am I patient 25,473? I asked. Kelly nodded. But how did she get the samples? I asked, seeing Kelly's embarrassment for the first time. She secretly took samples for analysis when you couldn't get her pregnant after 6 months, Kelly explained. Instead of talking to me, she found guys who looked like me and accepted their donations the old-fashioned way, Kelly continued. She said your insurance didn't cover a RT, which is expensive, and you'd already used your savings to buy the house. I leaned forward, my forehead on the desk. That means I won't have to pay child support if her plan works, right? Kelly looked even sadder. You'll still need to get tested since you're low but not zero. Why not? What's wrong? I asked. Ma realized she was exposed and you're threatening divorce, so she went to her OBGYN for the morning after pill. Kelly said, but today isn't the morning after. She was with her first guy Thursday night, I said, confused. Dr. Wellborn confirmed it. Ma asked her to call me, Kelly explained. Ma had gone to extreme lengths to conceive, but now, knowing I wouldn't raise someone else's child, she was erasing the mistake. It was also sad. Then I realized another detail. She did this just before my hunting trip. She was preparing to get pregnant and would have been with me on Monday to reinforce the idea. God knows what diseases she picked up, I said. Kelly held my hand reassuringly. STDs are a concern, but Ma was thinking about that too when she made the appointment. Matt, after our meeting yesterday, I reviewed the security footage and noticed something strange. At the beginning of her visits, she'd often look at the smartphones of her visitors. She did this a month ago too, Kelly said. Oh crap, I muttered. What? Kelly asked. She did it a month ago too. I still have to take the test, I said. Uh-huh, she admitted. It was the first and only time when that didn't work. She tried again during your hunting trip. She planned to return to Fidelity afterward, Kelly explained. I thought we agreed we wanted at least 2 or 3 children, I said, shaking off the heartbreaking thoughts. Did you say something about the camera footage and STDs? Yes. Did you notice how she often checked her visitors' smartphones shortly after they arrived? Kelly asked. Yes, I figured she was checking their invites, I replied. She was checking their current STI and HIV test results, Kelly clarified. Disbelief showed on my face. They get tested regularly. Yeah, they do, Kelly continued. So what? I asked Frank later over pizza and beer. Do you get tested regularly and carry the results? Actually, yes, I do. I always use protection, and I carry the labs with me. If I start dating again, I'll probably have to do that nonsense too, Frank said. When you start dating again, he emphasized. But yeah, I'd recommend it, man. I got to say, he continued. I'm surprised Ma's lawyer let her spill so many details early in the negotiations. She doesn't have a lawyer yet. Kelly found her outside her office this morning and insisted on talking. Kelly advised her to get a lawyer, but Maeve was convinced that once I knew the truth, I'd call off the divorce. And how did that work out? He asked. Riley, Kelly said. Maeve believed her plan made so much sense that I would come home tonight. Frank handed me another beer as we sat in his apartment. I planned to stay there until deciding if I could live in the same town as Maeve, let alone the same house. A week and a half later, I was back in the conference room at Green Family Law. Kelly and I sat on one side, Maeve and her attorney on the other. Mr. Karras, Mr. Witt, said the balding lawyer, we have 2 problems. First, Mrs. Karras wants to stay married. Second, if reconciliation is impossible, the proposed agreement is insufficient. It suggests a 50/50th division of property but doesn't include all marital assets, and the proposed spousal support is too low and short-lived. Kelly tapped my foot under the table, signaling, I told you so. I acknowledged it faintly. Mr. Philpott, Kelly interjected, Mr. Karras has agreed to pay 60% of your fees as part of the assets. This shows remarkable fairness for a man who has been wronged. The judge will take note of this if we can't resolve these issues here. I wanted the case over with and for Maeve to be treated fairly, not to get half of everything, but to avoid living in a disadvantaged area or moving in with her parents. She refused to get a lawyer, thinking we shouldn't divorce. With her salary, she could only afford a subpar lawyer, so I asked Kelly to find someone decent for her. And Kelly continued, What about my client's quality of life? You've seen the evidence, Mr. Philpott. Imagine what he goes through every night with those images in his head. It was dramatic, but Kelly wasn't exaggerating. I struggled with therapy, although Kelly and Frank assured me it would help. Ironically, the psychiatrist consultation was covered by my health plan, unlike Art, which could have prevented all this. I'm so sorry, Maddie, so sorry. Maeve sobbed. Philpott squeezed her hand again. Miss DeWitt, Philpott said, while I sympathize with Mr. Karras, our state's laws don't consider these matters in dividing marital property or awarding spousal support. Mr. Philpott, Kelly snapped, if your client doesn't agree to the negotiated offer, we won't file it. If we go to court, she placed her hand on a thicker pile of papers, this petition will be filed on the grounds of your client's infidelity. The settlement terms here are much less generous. I saw his hand tremble as he wanted to open the package but held back. Okay, I'd gotten Maeve fair representation while making this case public would embarrass Mr. Karras. It would be even worse for Mrs. Karras, especially since we will subpoena the names of all participants in her affairs and conduct a paternity test on the child she tried to conceive with them. Maeve gasped, then made a sound of deep sadness. Okay, stop it, shouted an indignant Philpott. There's no need to be so rude, Mr. Witt. Mrs. Karras took measures to avoid conception despite wanting a child with Mr. Karras, a desire he shared. My baby, our baby, I whispered. Kelly placed her hand on mine and pressed her foot against mine. But it would be ours, Ma exclaimed. It would be ours, yours and mine. The lawyers agreed to a short break. Kelly took me to her office while Philpott led Maeve outside. As we reconvened, Philpott continued, Mrs. Karras took drastic measures forced by her husband's stubbornness to prevent conception, even though it could have been Mr. Karras's child. Kelly stood firmly, sensing my anger. Her next words were softer, directed at Ma. We understand Mrs. Karras made a difficult decision and did the right thing under the circumstances. Mr. Karras and I recognize the pain she must be feeling. Kelly then turned back to Philpott. Unfortunately, it hasn't been determined if your client's intervention was successful. She may still be pregnant. We need to address this threat at the root. I glanced at Maeve, who looked pale, fearing she might faint. Kelly continued. The agreement states any such child would not belong to my client. Mr. Karras will take a paternity test to confirm this. If we go to court, we will demand the same from any potential fathers. Kelly wanted to add, if she decides to carry the baby, but I vetoed that. There was enough tension already. Ma pressed her lawyer's hand. They had discussed their next steps. All that aside, Philpott said, we'd like to return to Mrs. Karras's first position, not to file for divorce. Instead, she and her husband should go to counseling and find a solution to start a family. Why couldn't she have done this from the beginning? I almost howled. Why not just tell me instead of cheating? Mr. Karras, Matt. Voices overlapped before I slammed my fist on the table. I stared at the surface and said through clenched teeth, I'm already in counseling. My therapist says the why question is like a funnel. I can't heal until it fills up. He suggested I ask Maeve to join a session, but now I need to know why you brought strangers into our bed, instead of telling me about the problem. My client didn't, Philpott began, but Ma interrupted. I didn't want to hurt you by telling you that you couldn't give me a baby. You're so into your physicality, and I didn't want you to think you weren't enough, insisted Maeve. Oh my God, am I really such an idiot? I asked, wondering if I'd missed a character flaw. No, she repeated. I said it wrong. She took a breath. If we could afford IVF, I'd have told you, but we couldn't. We wanted to start a family now, so it was about the donor, not breaking out of the monotony of marriage. Exactly, Ma exclaimed. Why would I ever want to run away, so you didn't enjoy it? She flinched but continued. Don't you see? Yes, I called them folders on my page, but they were really all you. Any memories were connected to you, like in those multiverse comic book movies you love. I could add the memories of doing it with you, younger or older, to the wonderful memories I have of doing it with you now. And when you thought back to those encounters, or feeding the child one of those alternate selves had put inside you, you always thought of your real self, right? She grimaced at my words but continued. Yes, always about you. I turned to look at Attorney DeWitt, who raised her eyebrows in question. I nodded silently. She reached for the other folder, circled in red, the nuclear option. As I spoke, Kelly slowly pulled out a series of photos and placed them in front of Maeve and her lawyer. The 8x10 color photos were from the front and back cameras in the house, as well as a video I had taken Friday night while spying. Ma's face turned from gray to green, and she barely made it to the trash can before throwing up. Our house on 3rd Street sold quickly despite owning it for less than 2 years. It had appreciated enough to pay off the mortgage and cover moving expenses. I moved from Frank's apartment to a work-friendly condo, and May moved back to her hometown, though she managed to get a small apartment instead of moving into her childhood bedroom. She wasn't pregnant, and she found a decent job that allowed her a reasonable lifestyle. While the child support I paid for 5 months wasn't a huge strain, I was glad she wouldn't be destitute when it stopped. After the 6th month, she brought this misfortune on both of us, and her betrayal still haunted me. She was the love of my life, and I knew her remorse and regrets were genuine. Her last letter said she still hoped for reconciliation, but that seemed unlikely. Therapy helped me dump anger and despair, and I no longer saw myself as a huge loser facing decades of dull monotony. As for Tracy, she ended up as a barista at a Starbucks, blaming Frank for her troubles, though there was no evidence to support it. The police cleared him with witnesses and surveillance footage proving he was at a Foo Fighters concert that night. Looking ahead, once I pay the last amount of spousal support, I'll have fulfilled all my obligations. From the divorce, and Kelly DeWitt will no longer be my attorney. When she found out I attended an art exhibit and enjoyed it, she said she wished our first date had been at the gallery too.